time, May 40 here. So often the sharpest comments, the most accurate, the most devastating critiques I've heard are from people who don't really care about me or hate me. Often my strongest critics, my biggest enemies, are willing to give me tough truths in direct, blunt ways that my friends or family may not give me. And there were a few years where I was like the Matt Drudge of Orthodox Judaism. And so between 2002 and 2008, I wrote a lot of stories about rabbinic misconduct. And there was something about sexual abuse by rabbis, particularly Orthodox rabbis, that really ticked me off. And there was this one rabbi who'd been quite credibly accused of some, naughty deeds, and you could make a very strong case that some of it amounted to abuse, but not in a legal sense. There were no legal charges filed against him. It wasn't children. And very smart guy. And he said to me, I get the sense from reading your blog that someone abused religious authority against you when you were a kid, and that really triggers you. Doggone it, he was right. My father was a self-made man, had a PhD in rhetoric, and he was very good at provocation. He was very good at winning arguments. He was smarter than I was. He was more disciplined than I was. He was more accomplished than I was. He was more moral than I was. And doggone it, maybe I developed a little bit of a chip on my shoulder against what I felt was the abuse of religious authority. And I don't like, in fact, I may even get triggered when people use moral claims to cloak their selfish interests. It triggers me, bro. And I'm thinking about Dexter Filkins, and he's now a writer for The New Yorker, right? You can't get more prestigious than The New Yorker. And he published a book in 2008 that I loved. It was called The Forever War. And it was just so raw, just so real, just unvarnished truth, man. And this is what I wrote about it in 2008. I can't stop raving about this book. It is mesmerizing. It's hard to put down. This book is horrifying. It's about the American occupation of Iraq. It is gritty. It is real. I can't believe the courage of the man who wrote it. I could never do what he did. And Dexter Filkins, such a great bloke, he even gave me an interview for my blog. And now, over the past week, I just read his New Yorker profile of Marco Rubio. And it's such a tissue of elite cliches. It is such an amazing compilation of chattering class nonsense. For example, he talks about how the United States has lost its credibility under Donald Trump because Trump has threatened our allies and he's threatened international norms and he disregards these standards and these procedures. And he threatens to use military force to take over Greenland. And he threatens to diminish the independence of the Federal Reserve. Is there anything that burns you up more than any threat to the independence of the Federal Reserve, which frequently acts as a globalist institution, which is all well and good. We love our globalists, don't we? But what is so sacred about the Federal Reserve? What is so sacred about the independence of this or that federal agency? Count me skeptical. I know what the sacred is. All right, the sacred is Bondi Beach if you're a fair dinkum Aussie. The sacred is Israel if you're a Jew or someone who holds the Bible or the Jewish state in high esteem. The sacred, right, is the realm of God and holy days and holy places and holy objects. The sacred is the beautiful and the awesome. Driving into Yosemite, for me, that's a sacred experience. Being in Big Sur, sacred experience. And I understand different people have different hero systems, and depending on your hero system, that which is sacred to you, right? International norms, human rights, international law, right? These things may be sacred to you, right? For me, tefillin and keeping kosher, that's sacred to me, may not be sacred to you. I need to be more broad-minded about things. Such exciting times, and I was sick over the weekend. I think I got my pet back. And this is the Commentary Magazine podcast from January 9th. They got a bloke on here from the Organization for the Defense of Democracies. It's a pro-Israel group. Jonathan Schanzer here.
Where are the Europeans in all of this? Where are those Western champions of democracy that are like that are saying, hey, this is a great opportunity, not just for the people of Iran to take their country back, right? Because it's been occupied since 1979 by a crazy, like, nutball regime. And so here's this great opportunity for, for the world to give Iran back to the Iranians and to potentially bring the temperature down across the Middle East, because the Iranians have been so involved in the export of terrorism and violence and mayhem around the entire region. I mean, again, the opportunity here, I don't think people have understand it enough. By the way, I think I mentioned this before, but even the way the media is writing about this, and I know that there's lots of different media these days, and there are good people out there podcasting about this and writing in their Substacks. But where's the Washington Post on this? Where's the New York Times on this? I mean, where's the mainstream media that should be out there, calling for us, like for Trump to do more? Right.
There was an incredible thing in the BBC, right? The BBC had this, was being questioned over where are they and why aren't they publishing some of these great images and videos and things that are floating around. And one of the guys at the BBC responded on Twitter that, look, you have to verify these things as a news organization. Right. We're not on the ground in Iran. We're not, so and it's like, do you listen to yourself? Like, how 50 videos of flooding tents in Gaza a day you put on your website a day, and how many videos during the 2-year war were either AI or staged, or a lot of stuff that came through was just BS, right? I mean, let's just put it out. And the BBC was publishing all of this stuff and then going, well, we report, you decide type of stuff. And now they're saying, well, we have to be responsible. I don't know exactly where this video came from. I feel like it's an admission of, again, it's like an admission of fault in their coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. It's it's practically
it's almost exactly the opposite. That the reason that they are not covering this the way that they're covering this is because it dovetails with the idea that Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela have had a net positive consequence in terms of emboldening people in another faraway country of which we know little, where he had another foreign policy and military success just 6 months ago. And they are not going to focus on this unless they are beaten about the face and neck and compelled to.
But John,
that's part of it. But I just
the other part of this is they were like this before Trump came in.
Well, of course,
but there's a related point here, which is that Jonathan mentioned, like, where are the campus protesters, and I don't think we need to beat up on them a little more right now, because it is absolutely not surprising that there are no campus protesters coming out in favor of the Iranian people now. They have spent years protesting in favor of the Iranian regime.
Okay, let's get back to talking about Dexter Filkins. Is Dexter Filkins, is he changed, or has his situation changed and that's changed him? Right? So when he was an independent author, right, he could afford to be brave in the Forever War. Now he writes for the New Yorker. And so he shifted from being real to protecting international norms and institutions and seeking status and protecting his status, right? So 2008, he was truth first, situation first. He was focused on the raw biological reality of war, by 2026, he's become a word fetishist. Now, I love words. My father did a PhD in rhetoric. I read a ton of books. I absolutely love words, love playing with words. I love provoking with words. I love anything you can do with a word that is permitted by the Torah, right? I love to do. And in Hebrew, the word for word is the same word as the word for thing. So words are things, words are real, words matter. Yeah, words are real, words are things, words matter. But I don't find it useful to look at words über alles. I'm not sure that words are more important than every other consideration. So, let's say you had an employer and he didn't give you kind words, but he paid you 10% more than an employer who showered you with kind words. Now, I wonder if you're a healthy person, the healthy choice would be to prefer the extra salary and to go without the kind words, right? You shouldn't be willing to give up 10% of your salary for kind words. And I say this knowing in all vulnerability, sometimes kind words feels like life or death to me, right? Sometimes kind words just meant absolutely everything in the world to me. I've been desperate, I've been vulnerable, I've been down, and a kind word has just completely shifted my mood. But I think if you're a healthy person embedded in just normal level of relations with family, friends, community, you wouldn't sacrifice 10% of your income, let alone more, on the basis of words. Words are nice, but there are a lot of things that are more important. And when I see the veneration given by our elites to words, and words that signal international norms and international law and protect our institutions, I just find it overwrought, and it just seems removed from reality, right? Words seem to be primarily used in status games. And I'm playing a status game right now, right? I want status among a tiny group of people that I respect from doing an insightful show. So I don't do this show primarily for money, right? I don't do this show primarily for giggles, right? I do this show primarily for status among a tiny group of people, right? I don't have a small audience. I have a select audience, right? And you're invited to this special truth-seeking event. So normally a successful live stream, successful podcast, it needs to revolve around building up a tribe. But as soon as you are revving up a tribe, you are putting less priority on truth in the situation. I want to put as my highest priority truth without being self-destructive and antisocial, and I want to be real about the situation. So I don't want to primarily play status games of deception. I want to play a status game of dedication to as much truth as is socially acceptable to say and as the situation permits. Right? I'm not a huge fan of fetishizing the use of word to put your highest priority, these social coordination signals among the credentialed class. Right? In his book, The Forever War, Dexter Filkins was real. He was documenting how the situation incentivized people, dictated behavior. Often the situation is more powerful than you or me or any internal force going on with someone. Right? The heat of the desert, the threat of a sniper will dictate your behavior more than anything else. Now he treats behavior as some kind of global character flaw, and he pathologizes those who deviate from the elite consensus of what a good person is. So in his book, he just writes truth. He just writes this flat, visceral tone about the situation in Iraq, the impulses towards security and safety of men in combat, right? People who work for ICE, people who work for police, people who work in dangerous jobs, they want to go home. And that's why they're out there establishing the perimeter when there's some kind of mass shooting, usually, rather than confronting the shooter. Because if they confront the shooter, they might get hurt. So, we're establishing the perimeter. So you need to know the situation. You need to understand what are the incentives that operate. Why is ICE behaving so badly from the perspective of probably a majority of Americans? because ICE is in very difficult situations in blue states, in sanctuary cities, where there's no local law enforcement support. And so they're thrust into really difficult, challenging situations. I don't know about you. The more difficult, the more challenging my situation, the more likely I am to behave badly. Right? When I'm running late, I'm not Mr. Nice. I'm not Mr. Polite. I'm not Mr. Empathy. And that's just like running late. Right? The more and more pressure I have, right, the more and more I tense up, and the more and more likely I am to lash out, my voice to crack, dissolve it in a puddle of my anxiety and fears.
I accept everything you just said, and I want to add something to it. I mentioned this the other day, sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I actually do think it's a real dynamic. I don't think any of these people are having sex.
Yes.
I really don't. No. I think it's not coincidental that all these women are obese and unattractive with multiple piercings, no makeup, skin issues. That, like, I'm sorry, but if you're having positive interactions with men, where like you're going to bed with them and they're treating you well and you're enjoying it and you feel the euphoria that comes after that, you're not going out there and looking at all these men as the devil enemies who you want to hurt and kill and stop.
So all my life, I have loved and specialized and honed my abilities, largely inherited from my father, but I've probably taken them in a much nastier direction. I just love winding people up. I'm from Australia, where we cut down tall poppies. We love to take the mickey out of people. And so I've just loved winding people up and provoking people. And about 10 years ago, my therapist explained to me, Luke, when you unnecessarily provoke people, you're hurting people. Ooh, I didn't think of myself as hurting people. I thought I was revealing truth. I thought I was delivering divine karma. But I hope I've grown. But yeah, I get way too much joy and energy and thrill from unnecessarily provoking people. And I probably enjoyed dicing people up and cutting people up because I was unhappy and it made me feel better when I took other people down. But I was this combination through way too much of my life of verbal cruelty to others and an absolute thin skin when it came to myself. And there was just this one incredibly painful situation in 7th grade where I just been taking the mickey out of everyone. Then people just turned that back on me, and I walked out of class either verging on tears or in beginning of tears. I said, "Shut up!" And I marched out of class, and the teacher said, "Why are you guys picking on Luke?" And they very accurately said, "Because he picks on us." And my parents heard about it. My stepmother was very disappointed. She says, "Luke, if you're going to dish it out, you got to be able to take it." And yeah, I intellectually believe that. Wish it were true. But there are all sorts of times I'm incredibly thin-skinned, and that's not unique. I've interviewed thousands of people in my life, and every time I get to know someone, the better I get to know someone, the more vulnerable I recognize they are. Like, everyone has huge areas of vulnerability, and I'm not sure that the world divides up into the thin skin versus the thick skin. There's something to that, but I'm much more of a situationist. There are situations where I'm thin-skinned. There are situations where you're thin-skinned. There are situations where everyone is thin-skinned. And there are other situations where you're thick-skinned, right? The more secure you are with your family, your friends, your job, your community, your life, right, the more likely you are to be thick-skinned. The more insecure you are, right, the more likely you are to be thin-skinned. If you are having unsuccessful interactions, so people are turning away from you and you feel humiliated, right, you're going to get hyper vulnerable, right? You get reported for HR for a microaggression, you are going to go, "Oh my God, I'm in danger of losing my job, and I've got a family counting on me, and oh, those damn thin-skinned people who can't take a joke," right? You're going to feel incredibly vulnerable. On the other hand, if you're going through the day and people are responding to you and they're getting on the same page with you and you're building something mutual together, right, then you're going to feel a lot more thick-skinned. So, as REM says, everybody hurts, everybody cries, and everybody regards their political opponents as physically ugly.
And same for the guys. These young men, we know that there's huge swaths of them who are not dating. They're not having sex with women. They're not drinking anymore. There's no release. It's not like when we were young in the late 80s, where it was like a life of debauchery, but we were all happy. There's something wrong with these people today. These are mostly like millennials, late.
So I often have the most inappropriate reactions when somebody I know passes. For example, I did feel some sadness, and I shared a tear or two on a live stream. I went live stream within an hour of finding out that my father had died. But overwhelmingly, my reaction to my father dying was one of relief. Like, he terrified me. Not because he was a bad man, not because he did anything horrible. That was just my reaction. He terrified me because I'm thin-skinned or weak or a wimp or whatever you want to call it. And I had a profound point that was going to forever change your life. But then I started thinking about this beautiful woman who was wearing black fishnet stockings. Oh, my God. I'm only flesh and blood, mate.
End millennials who I think all of them have deeply unhappy personal lives, and it's manifesting on the streets of Minneapolis.
Oh, 100% agreed. And, you need...
Now, all my life, people have told me, stop being so selfish, stop being so self-centered, start thinking of others. But guess what? If you've got a gaping psychic wound, you're not going to be able to successfully focus on other people. When I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling happy, when I'm feeling confident, I tend to naturally help other people. When I am losing at life, when I am insecure, when I am desperate, when there's some kind of threat to my survival, I become very selfish. So a lot of moral goodness and kindness and decency is either a focus or a function of luck or of situation. Right? If you are blessed to be in situations where you're fortunate and happy and strong, you'll naturally gravitate towards being kind. And if you are not in that situation, you won't. And it's probably not largely because you're just intrinsically wonderful or intrinsically selfish.
Relationships, you need to be attracted to somebody. By the way, when you're attracted to somebody, you want them to be attracted to you, and thus you don't want to get arrested and held in a tank overnight because you want to be with your honey bunny and things of that nature. And also, you want to keep yourself together. You want to cut your hair. You want to lose 5 pounds. You want to get a good job. Like, you want them to be attractive. That's number one. Number two, this sounds corny.
I don't think happy people tend to devote themselves to political activism. And sometimes political activism is more important than your happiness. So if you're a believer in Zionism, then Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, even though his pursuit of Zionism had devastating effects to people close to him, right, you'd say in certain instances that sacrifice is worth it. But in general, I don't think you naturally associate political activism with unhappiness. That's why Mark Halperin had such a profound point in the run-up to the 2024 election. He feared a major mental health crisis on the left because the more you are on the left, the more you tend towards a social constructionist view of reality, that society constructs reality, and therefore what government does has a much more profound effect than just the conservative, traditional, tribal, nationalist, racial approach, which is that what people do is largely a response to their innate incentives or to their tribe. So if you're on the left, you tend to put more of your locus of awareness or locus of happiness, locus of agency outside of yourself. You're much more concerned about racism and sexism, and you're more likely to have leapfrogging loyalties where, well, your primary loyalty is to yourself, but then your next highest loyalty is to oppressed lesbians in Uganda, and then your next highest loyalty is to Somalians in Minnesota, and then your next highest loyalty is to those brave Ukrainians, right? Well, if you're a trad, if you're nationalist, racialist, religious, conservative, you'll most likely have concentric circles of loyalty. So your loyalty will go from yourself to your family, to your extended family, to your friends and community, to your city, state, nation, and keep spreading outwards, and those will be your priorities. Well, if you're on the left, you'll have much more exciting and perhaps more difficult to predict leapfrogging loyalties, which probably lays you open to more unhappiness, because your happiness is bound up with all sorts of things that you can't control. And I would think that being more trad, your happiness is primarily going to be focused on your family and your tribe. And you're not going to be nearly as worried about Somalians in Minnesota if they're not part of your tribe.
Corny, but people used to have hobbies. Like 30-year-old guys were restoring a car in the garage. They had a project. Women had a project. Women did things. They knitted and they sewed and they built tree houses and they gardened and they.
I've been getting quite teary of late. I'm not quite sure why, but now I just read a comment by Bob Outberger. It makes me teary. It says, "My father, in most times, is the first and the only call I'll make when I have trouble or have important decisions to make." I envy you, bro. Just like, I guess, is it true that most people have probably more positive feelings towards their parents than negative feelings? I don't understand that trope in movies and books and TV shows about some disconsolate child because their father didn't show up to their birthday party or their play or their sporting event. The last thing I ever wanted as a child was for my parents, or as an adult was for my parents to show up to something that was important to me. All my happy memories from childhood were away from my parents, not because my parents were bad people. That's just my experience of reality. And so when I encounter people who are sad that their parent has died, I am so jealous. Like, I like, what's that like, bro? I mean, that's amazing. And I think one way that life has gotten significantly better since the 60s is that children, and adult children in particular, and parents are more likely to be friends now. That adult children may live quite happily with their parents. I think that's a wonderful development. If your kids become adults and you can develop a friendly relationship, I can only imagine that's fantastic. And I find it so sad. Someone's stuck in a bad marriage. They get divorced. They find love. They find lasting love. But their children from the first marriage ostracize them, can never accept that you found love and joy and happiness in a new spouse. That just strikes me as incredibly sad. And just talking to a friend last night, he said, 40, I wish that you could know the joy of having a family. And I said, bro, I got a family. I got my shul. But of course, my shul would say, 40, you need a family. I've got you, bro. I've got you, babe.
We're like physically engaged.
They had book clubs.
Right. They were just engaged with things. And when you're in the middle, if you really think about it, when you're really in the middle of something, like I'll do a lot of remodels. When I'm in the middle of a remodel, that's where I'm at. That's where my head's at. That's where I'm thinking about. That's where my spare time is. And if someone said, hey, let's go out for Gay Lives Matter.
Right, Dexter Filkins, right, loved his book. Right, he talked about Iraq and Afghanistan. He said, right, the rules of civilization have broken. They're not just broken; they're completely irrelevant. Right, he documented the end of civilization, the collapse of norms, like in real time. It was incredibly compelling. Now, in this Marco Rubio profile, he's all mourning the erosion of norms as if these are some kind of sacred physical shield, and he is appalled by Marco Rubio's transactional nature. Look, we're pretty much all transactional. Transactional is evolutionarily adaptive, but you don't want to appear transactional. Right? That's probably not an adaptive, rational, self-seeking appearance, right? You don't want to appear to be transactional, but you're going to be transactional. That's going to be an evolutionary adaptation, right? And if you're not, you're going to be less likely to reproduce, right? So now Dexter Filkins doesn't see that Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, his transactional nature. It's not a rational response to a changing situation, right? It's a Faustian bargain, right? He has sold his soul to the devil. And I guess I get triggered by the use of these sacred words and sacred concepts where I don't think they belong. I hear that the Vice President J.D. Vance, that he's transactional and he's an opportunist. Well, we're evolutionarily designed to take advantage of opportunities. Now, you don't want to get a reputation as a gossip. You don't want to get a reputation as a transactionalist. You don't want to get a reputation of being an opportunist. But opportunism is adaptive. Right? Opportunism is being in reality. Now, there are levels of opportunism that are maladaptive. Generally speaking, taking advantage of opportunities is a good thing. Not that I think you should knock over old ladies and take their purses. Right? You shouldn't get women drunk and try to have sex with them. So now in this Marco Rubio profile, Dexter Filkins mourns the erosion of norms. Right? And his prose, right, it has changed from telling the truth. His writings changed from describing the situation into a tissue of elite cliches designed to signal that he now belongs to the elite chattering class. So here he is in his book, and he was a raw realist, a truth teller in the situation. The smell of the dead was everywhere, a sweet, heavy scent that stuck to the back of your throat, right? Here he's focused on biological reality. He's not concerned with his social status. Now, he's turned pompous in this Marco Rubio profile. Rubio moves through the sterile, marble-floored corridors of the Capitol with the cautious air of a man who has traded his once bright legacy for a seat at a table where the menu is set by another. Guess what? Everybody will spend much of their time sitting at a table where the menu is set by another, right? When you go to work, the menu is set by another, usually. In life, the menu will be set by another person much of the time. Like, I love my spare time. I love getting to do my live streams because I get to set the menu here. But the nature of reality is that we have to submit to the situation, and very rarely will we be the dominant person in a situation. So here, Dexter Filkins uses words to create a particular mood to imply a moral judgment that he cannot prove with just truth and data and reality and situation. So why? And it's driven by the status closure of being a writer for the New Yorker, not wanting to risk his status, right? And now he's operating not to tell truth, but to coordinate BS, right? To keep his high status in the elite media world, he has to use values to mask class interests, right? Admitting that a nationalist, racialist, religious, traditionalist, tribal shift may be a rational, adaptive response to a changing situation. That's low status, mate. You're supposed to transcend all those things. So Dexter Filkins is now part of our elite chattering class that puts a higher priority on signaling to each other and signaling that we're good people, right, over being truthful and over detecting raw, visceral threats. Right? That used to be what his writing was in his book, 2008, just like raw threat detection, raw truth-telling, raw biological reality, raw description of the situation. And now it's pious and pompous and not for the better.
And protest on Saturday. I go, no, I got to be at the Home Depot. I'm picking up sheetrock. I can't do that. You know what I mean? It really...
Gay lives matter.
Well, whatever the next group is. The point is I think I invented the ultimate pin.
I think so, too.
Mark Ruffalo,
we'll start it.
I got you.
You and I will start it in our spare time.
Mark, I got your next pin. Next for the Golden Globes. But, yeah, you really – look, the devil makes work for idle hands. It sounds corny, but it is so true. Like, you need something to –
Adam Carolla has a ton of common sense. And as someone who does not have a ton of common sense, I'm envious of Adam Carolla's abilities, right? Good bloke. All right, so Dexter Filkins used to be on the periphery of the elite, right? He was in the war zones, right? Now he's moved to the very center of the elite. Now he's right in the middle of the New Yorker in the prestige press. And where he is now, in this situation, right, in this social class, he gets his prestige and his membership from a particular presentation, a particular use of language and claims of moral norms and face and prestige and all the things that, for example, the British Raj clung to before their own cataract of disaster with the dissolution of the British Empire. I am a big fan of this historian, Alan Allport, huge fan of his 2 books on Britain in World War II. Like, the latest one is called Advanced Britannia, the epic story of the Second World War. I even bought it in advance on Audible. It's over 30 hours. I just let it run all night. And just love this guy's work.
Live for, you need a project, you need things you're invested in. Also, you need things to lose. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a homeowner. I don't want to go out and get injured by an ICE officer and not be able to pay my mortgage or get sued by somebody if I throw a rock.
Right. The more you have to lose, the less likely you are to do live streams, the less likely you are to post on social media, the less likely you are to participate in anything dangerous or controversial. And let's face it, 99% of people who participate in live streams on uncomfortable and controversial topics, it's a self-destructive act, right? If you're earning 6 figures and you go out and read Kevin McDonald's cultural critique and you quit your job to drive for Uber to talk to people about the Jewish question, probably an act of self-destruction. I'm going to go out on a limb there. So the more you have to lose, right, the more careful you will be with your behavior. The more careful you are with your behavior, the less likely you are to commit criminal violence, less likely you are to put yourself in dangerous situations, the more likely you are to engage in pro-social behavior. So we think of people from East Asia as being slow, cautious drivers. And to the extent that's true, they also tend to be cautious and make really good decisions with regard to forming families and with regard to getting an education and with regard to commitment to work and family and community. Right? They make a lot of good decisions. They tend to have better educations than every other group, and they tend to earn more money than every other group and tend to have lower rates of STDs, and they tend to live longer, right? A lot of great things happen when you have stuff to lose, and when you feel like you have nothing to lose, that really predisposes people to terrible choices. And when Donald Trump claimed the 2020 election was stolen, it just let his fans off the moral hook. And January 6th and anything else just became morally permissible when you gave people a permission structure that the election was stolen from them. And therefore you have nothing left to lose. Right? You don't want to encourage people to think they have nothing to lose, because they will do terrible things.
In a van, I got a house. I don't want to lose my house. Like, you need to own something. You need to have.
When I came out of 6 years of being bedridden with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I was homeless so that I could pursue my dreams of an acting and modeling career, I felt I had nothing to lose. And I was so opportunistic and transactional that my therapist was afraid that I was a sociopath. I was sexually promiscuous. I was desperate. I had nothing to lose. I just lived for years and years and years in survival mode. And God forbid, when I was in survival mode, it allowed me to do selfish using things that were not good, but I couldn't face myself as not a good person, so I had to come up with excuses. So, for example, like 3 times in a row, I bought a $1,000 camera from Best Buy and then returned it for a full refund to film, to videotape what I told people was going to be a documentary on what women want. And I didn't know what I was doing. One of those sharp comments that the stranger told me, I'd interviewed the most brilliant movie producer. He produced the Ray Charles movie, and an officer and a gentleman, I think Stuart Benjamin, I think was his name. And he said after our interview, he said, I don't know what you're doing. And the sad truth was, I didn't know what I was doing either, which is why my book on the producers, profiles, and frustration was not some big shining success, and why I lived off my savings and my credit card for a year between September of 2001 and September of 2002. Right? I was never headed towards earning an honorable livelihood and had to go back to making my living from writing about the porn industry for the next 5 years because I didn't know what I was doing. And much of my life has not been successful because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't want to figure out what I was doing because it's just easier to do what I felt like rather than learning what I was doing. For example, right now, I could be giving the audience what it wants, but instead, I'm not. When I had $50,000 in credit card debt in, I think, 2012, I invested like $5,000 in a 6-month weekly class on how to put on a one-man play, but I was just psychologically just not equipped to implement most of the suggestions that the teacher gave. So when I did my one-man play for the first time, like 3 people showed up. My one-man play on eroticized rage did not set the world on fire because I was told what I needed to do, but I had all these internal blocks from doing it.
Have relationships. You need to have hobbies. You need to be engaged. These people are not engaged. It's edibles, celibacy, and video games.
Mm-hmm. And leaning into unattractiveness. We've seen this.
And Bob says, is everyone attacking Marco Rubio because he's the most effective man in the Trump administration? Yeah, right? You're going to have more incentives to attack people who are more famous, more power, more attention, more news coverage. Right? Rather, we don't tend to hate, denigrate, or even talk about people who don't matter. Right? You only gossip about and criticize people who don't matter. So I was feeling very insecure in my standing in Orthodox Judaism many, many years ago. And this professor of Jewish studies said to me, you're a member of the community. And it was in the context of we only gossip about people who we consider a member of our community. And so he was letting me know that people were gossiping about me. I was feeling quite lonely one night, walking down the street on a Friday night, and I ran into like a young couple from my synagogue, and I thought, they should invite me over for a Shabbat meal. And when I ran into them, they said, "Oh, we were just talking about you. Did you know I got on the cover of the Jewish Journal in 2007, and it didn't lead to anything. It didn't give me more hits to my blog. If I tell you that the article was fair, then I'm saying I'm a bad person. If I tell you the article was unfair, I'm telling you that I'm a whiner and a complainer and I can't take it. So I'm just like between a rock and a hard place. I can't have either response. I didn't get any Shabbat invites. I didn't even get coffee out of that cover story, right? Nobody read that and thought, oh, I want to get to know 40.
The thing after Trump won, another protest wave, and now here all these women start shaving their heads, which I guarantee you, sisters, is not the answer. No one's life, no female, ever got better after she shaved her head. And it's like they think it's a form of empowerment. Meanwhile, it's like hair is considered very attractive by men. It's something that kind of softens you. Like they're looking to be like hard and nasty and even grosser than they started. I'm going to give you an example of this woman who wants us to believe she's super empathetic, but by the way, she doesn't even know Renee Good's proper name, who's the woman who was killed in that ICE incident after she tried to run him over. Listen to Stop 21.
So I shave all my hair off every 6 months, and it bothers people. It just strikes most people as antisocial. But no matter how much people close to me plead with me not to do it, I just keep doing it. And I had a girlfriend with beautiful long hair and some sapphic tendencies that she would intermittently engage in when she wanted to get rid of me. And she would cut her hair short. It really bothered me. And then she'd say, well, you didn't do anything with my long, beautiful hair.
She's got the long hair. She's shaving it. And she writes on here, we watched Renee Cook get brutally gunned down by ICE. It's not, and so she wrote it. She took the time to write it. We're just watching her with a sad face shave her hair off.
I know way too many guys who are married to women who are addicted to their iPhones. I don't recall the complaint going the other direction. I'm sure it does for some people. But when I hear about a complaint that my spouse is addicted to the iPhone, just from what I hear, it's always men complaining about their wife being addicted to it. I mean, that would just really hurt me. I am not willing to make a great deal of effort in a conversation. I don't think I could have a long relationship with someone who wasn't adept with the English language, because I hate explaining myself. I don't want to put a great deal of effort into explaining when I'm being sarcastic or hyperbolic. And someone who's not listening or would rather look at their cell phone. I remember complaining when I was bedridden with chronic fatigue syndrome and complaining to my stepmother that she wasn't listening to me. And she told her friend Katie, and Katie said to her, like, Luke should be healthy, right? Instead, he's a wounded young God. Luke should be at UCLA having 500 people pay attention to him.
She's getting progressively upset, yes, because you're shaving off your hair, which doesn't look good. You look like a man now. That makes most women upset. So they think this is an act of defiance, Adam. I think it's an act of foolishness, and one literally every woman regrets when she does it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea for women. For men, I think it matters 5% as much.
Well, again, back to narcissism. Like, you can shave your head. I've shaved my head. I went one year in Halloween when I was 19 as Mr. T, but I didn't film myself shaving my head and then put it out there so people thought I was a hero. So keep in mind, everyone who's doing whatever it is.
So Dexter Filkins writes in the New Yorker about how the United States has lost credibility under Donald Trump. We have the world's strongest military. It is stronger than every other military in the world put together. I'd say that's credibility. You have the world's strongest economy. I'd say that's credibility. You have the world's most influential culture. I'd say that's credibility. Compared to just the economic and military might of the United States, I don't think the words Donald Trump says are that significant. Now, I disagree with Trump and the MAGA approach. I believe that allies worthy of better treatment than Trump thinks. I think the way that Trump treats allies and disdains alliances is misguided.
They're doing, the only reason we know about is because before they set up the razor, they set up the camera, and then they film themselves and they put it out there. So it's all a narcissistic disorder. Also, think about the narcissism. I've seen so many videos of so many women who are dumpy in their 50s.
So to me, credibility is largely about your relative amount of power in a situation. But for Dexter Filkins, right, in 2008, in his book, The Forever War, right, credibility meant having enough ammunition to survive combat to 2026, right? It's this cliche on using the correct high-status words, right? The situation used to refer to the raw physical, biological life and death situation of a war zone. But now he uses it as some kind of narrative device to describe a moral tragedy befalling the rules-based international order. And he now treats ideology, right, not just as a pragmatic cover, right, as a highfalutin excuse for pursuing our interests, right, not just a tool for tribal survival. Now it is some kind of sacred canopy that must not be broken to preserve elite status. Right, there's just this epical epochal shift between the forever war, this 2026 profile. And I think it reflects this broader epistemic shock within the chattering class. Our elite chattering class is at war with reality. When you get at war with reality, reality always wins. Right? In 2008, Filkins was primarily a reporter, a quintessential frontline reporter, operating in a world of reality and force and desperation and life and death. And now the situation is not the visceral realism of life and death choices, but to the pious mourning of this status-chasing monkey, right? 2008, he was part of the new realist elite that I prefer, right? He was documenting raw, unpleasant situational truths. He was talking about heat and blood and survival, right? And he wasn't using pious cliches because life and death was the story. But now he's turned his back on that. He's become credentialed expert, and he's retreated into the status closure of the New Yorker. Right? In his book, The Tragedy was the situation, the cost of war. In his new profiles, the tragedy is any threat to the rule-based international order with America intervening all over God's little green acre. Right? He's now removed himself from reporting the truth, reporting on the situation, to defending the BS that coordinates his particular peer group. So his 2008 work respected biology, the raw instincts of survival for soldiers and insurgents. Now he treats transactions and opportunities and opportunism as some kind of psychological and moral defect. Right? He talks about Faustian bargains to explain why someone would prioritize America's interests over words. Right? He fails to see that putting a higher priority on interests rather than esoteric, globalist, universal principles is often a rational biological realignment to a particular situation. And so his tone becomes more pompous, becomes more defensive, and you have the rise of the independent media because the prestige press, like the New Yorker and the New York Times, doubles down on moral judgment and atmospheric mood setting to maintain their status. And if you can't write some kind of 10,000 word tissue of cliches, right, you're not a serious analyst.
In horrible shape, and nobody wants to bang them. And then they do a video going, fellas, sorry, the vagine is closed until after Trump. And it's like, that's like, it'd be like me making a video going, you know what, supermodels, no more blowing me.
Right, most people enjoy the feeling of power. You don't think I love it when a woman laughs at my jokes, when I have the ability to charm and move and help people, right? It makes me feel great. The exercise of power feels good, right? It makes us stronger and healthier, more robust. And weakness and vulnerability tends to have the opposite effect, right? If you're feeling depressed, it's not because you have too much power and agency in your life, right? You have power and agency and love, and connection in your life, you're not likely to be depressed. Power feels good, man. Right? Pride feels good. And we feel pride basically in relation to how much power and influence we have with other people, how much we're able to move and affect them. So our chattering class loves to put down those who put a higher priority on things other than words in the international rules-based order and norms, right? So Dexter Filkins now treats the shattered credibility of the blob, the old signals, as the ending of civilization, right? Whereas the people he is profiling is simply looking at a shifting situational incentive, right? He's mourning the loss of the expert consensus, but the rest of the world has moved on to pursuing their own interests, right? This Dexter Filkins' New Yorker profiler, Marco Rubio, is the gold standard for the chattering class, right? The tropes are as predictable as they are beautifully written, right? And so when Dexter takes on Marco Rubio, right, he employs a specific tissue of narrative cliches to signal his high status, right? The once promising arc, right? He begins by invoking the ghost of the subject's former self. He had a promising arc, right, when he was a globalist and internationalist, when he was a principled young reformer. I would think that pursuing the interests of America, if you're an American statesman, that should be a principle. To me, rational, adaptive pursuit of interest should be a principle. And sometimes it should be a principle that should get a higher priority than esoteric universalist globalist principles that are operating against your self-interest. And now Marco Rubio's falling into a tragic descent from a principled young reformer to a loyalist apparatchik. Right? He just didn't respond to incentives. It wasn't a career move. It's all about his soul, guys. It's all about the shattering of a once bright legacy. And my God, he has descended into transactionalism. He's descended into tribalism and nationalism and opportunism. Right? He's descended into reality. And that's a moral failure. It's not a strategic move. It's a moral failure. Right? To call his foreign policy transactional, right? That's a disdainful term. It's right what you might call for cheap motels that you rent by the hour. Right? Maybe it's not just tawdry transactionalism. Maybe it is the brain finally aligning with its environment. But for Dexter Filkins, it is the erosion of the rules-based order.
Kamala Harris is elected, okay? Do you hear that, Claudia Schiffer?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay, here is, it's not exactly that woman, but it is somebody who I think claims to be a woman. And this just gives you a window into the mentality of what we're dealing with out there, the ICE agents. Look at SOT 23. I'm going to have to describe this one for the audience. SOT 23 for the listening audience involves, let's watch it.
I'm very privileged. I am white.
Oh, God.
I have a great community, and I have a
roof
beard
over
my head, as well as job security.
An actual.
So privileged. All right, another cliche in this Dexter Filkins profile. He's operating in the shadow of a con man. Marco now lives under the thumb of a strong man. Right? Marco Rubio once spoke the truth, guys, but now he's been subsumed. Right? I think Marco's never been better. This is my favorite Marco Rubio ever. Right? But Marco Rubio is perpetually adjusting his convictions to fit the gravity of a more powerful sun. Well, we all, if we're adaptive, adjust to reality. I would hope so. Right? Maybe it's not Marco Rubio changing his deepest, most moral convictions. Maybe he is shifting his alliance signals to remain part of the dominant coalition. Politics and government is about power. Why would you not want your side to have power? Right? Government is fundamentally coercive. Why would you not want the powers of coercion on your side? Right? The convictions and the principles were BS. They were coordination signals. They were status plays. And Filkins, like other elite reporters, is famous for finding the anonymous, disgruntled former staffers who speak in these perfect, mournful sentences. I don't recognize him anymore. So I remember in the Jewish Journal's cover story of me in 2007, there were all these, very mournful quotes about me, anonymous, devastating quotes, right? And that way the publication and the author, they get to outsource their moral judgment to these anonymous witnesses who confirm that the good values have been betrayed. Then you get the cinematic scenery as metaphor, right? It mirrors Marco's internal rot. Right, it's the heavy, humid air of West Miami. It's the sterile, windowless corridors of the State Department. Right, you paint the situation to put down the man, right, to imply destiny. Where someone who is rooted in reality, the situationist influenced by a philosopher like John M. Doris in his great book Lack of Character would say everything's contingent. Right, everything depends on the situation. So, what the elite media labels ideological flexibility is just a highfalutin way saying a person wants power, wants a job, right? That someone is strategically realigning with the current incentives. So, chattering class mourn the sunset of neoconservatism, sunset of globalism, right? They're saying the subject's old friends are angry. But if you look with an evolutionary lens, see, this is pretty predictable. When incentives shift, should not be shocked when people's behavior shifts accordingly.
I went to a Renaissance festival or a medieval festival.
Yeah, of course you do.
Varies. But when you spend time in the 12th or 16th centuries, you are escaping reality.
So, physiognomy may not be destiny, but I feel like I get a pretty good handle on someone from looking at them. And particularly as people get older, what's going on inside of them starts reflecting itself more and more. So if you have all sorts of weird interfering tics or these unnecessary and weird and maladaptive attention patterns, right, it doesn't usually reflect a life that is thriving. On the other hand, when you're thriving, you fly through life, right? You coast through life. You get strength from your interactions and moving through different situations. So for Dexter Filkins, the New Yorker, if you join the winning team, you've made a Faustian bargain, right? You've sold your soul to the devil. When really you've acted rationally, as you would expect from coalitional psychology. It's better to have power than not. So we're supposed to feel this great sense of civilizational loss. But I see a Marco Rubio man who has stopped putting his highest priority on words and instead puts a higher priority on reality and power. So I wondered, what would Dr. Filkins write about my big Sunday live stream show? Perhaps it goes something like this. In the flickering blue glow of a dual monitor setup, far from the mahogany paneled dining rooms of the Upper East Side, the old blogger adjusts his headset with the weary precision of a man who has seen too many car wrecks to believe in the sanctity of a shared value. He speaks into the void of the digital ether, his voice a flat, Australian inflected baritone that bypasses the democratic guardrails of the credentialed media. So for the New Yorker, right, this is a scene of profound cultural fragmentation. It's an erosion of the communal narrative. But to the thousands watching, it is more vital. It is the sound of the BS being scraped away. Here, in the unedited sprawl of a 3-hour Sunday stream, the word fetishism of the chattering class is replaced by the cold evolutionary logic of the situation. It is a world where credibility isn't shattered, it's simply rebuilt on the bedrock of common interest, one data point at a time.
And it's hard to build your life around a fantasy that is still deeply enmeshed with reality. And it's jarring. It's jarring to be looking at what we are dealing with in the United States and then to disappear.
But by converting to Judaism, many of the funniest critics I've had online called me like a religious tranny, or an ethnic tranny, moving from my former WASP identity to Jewish. So this is a pretty well-trodden path from people, writers who move to higher and higher forms of status and publication. So many begin documenting raw, uncomfortable human incentives and situations and biological reality, but eventually retreat into the incense-scented idyll of elite coordination. Think of George Packer, right? He used to operate as a realist. He used to document the structural collapse of the American canopy. He'd talk about individuals facing very difficult situations. But now his writing is pompous, it's pious. He's lamenting the erosion of norms, some kind of moral tragedy rather than evolutionary or situational realignment. He's transitioned from observing how the rules were irrelevant to a defender of the democratic guardrails that are the bureaucratic status closure for his own tribe. Thomas Friedman used to do more reporting. Now he's totally surrendered to the elite narrative alchemy. He used to have a sharp eye for the cold logic of tribal interests and reality of power. Today, he's like the quintessential word fetishist. Uses these metaphors, flat world or global leadership. They're all propagandistic BS to mask the raw interests of different groups. Right. Now Friedman treats the rule-based international order as a sacred liturgy, right, oblivious to the sensible power of the nationalist movements reshaping the map. So people have been driven by their professional incentives, which increasingly seems to reward value signaling and increasingly punishes blunt talk about interests and uncomfortable realities.
To 12th century England. I have felt guilty for working in this industry through all this time, especially when I want to be on the front lines. When I can't physically be on the front lines. I am not just a liability, I'm a target because of my size. I'm in better shape for others.
I want to be important. She wants to be important. Everyone wants to be important. But if you really are important, you probably don't fetishize importance and power and think about it and yearn for it and seek it out nearly as much as those who don't have it, right? If you've got a family, if you've got kids, right, you're unlikely to be seeking excitement with the same devotion as someone who doesn't.
Other things in that kind of capacity, but it's been a minute since I have resigned myself to taking care of me in order to be able to make the next big fight, and that next big fight is here. So I have to launch my plan. And my plan is to launch my time traveler event.
Yes. So, US dollar, still the world's primary reserve currency. US consumer markets, the world's most lucrative, but America's credibility is apparently shot because of Donald Trump. Right? I don't like many of the things that Trump says and does, but he's not endangering American credibility. Right? America has nuclear weapons. Right? We have a nearly $1 trillion defense budget. We have a global footprint that no other nation can match. We're embedded in all sorts of strategic alliances. Right? China has very few alliances that matter. Same with Russia, same with Iran. Right? What kind of fool rates American credibility primarily on the basis of words? Right? Only those who fetishize words. Right? I fetishize words at times, but I'm not going to tell you this is profound and true. Right? I fetishize many things. I don't expect, don't seek, don't need to be praised or respected because I like black fishnet stockings. Right? That's my fetish. That's my quirk. But I don't pretend that the black fishnet stockings run the world or black fishnet stockings the most important value. Now, for our elite, words aren't feelings. They are the legal and psychological infrastructure that makes hard power efficient. I think they oversell the importance of words and infrastructure. Right? People who fetishize words, they talk about, transaction costs and careless words make transactions more difficult. They have a point. And they talk about the price of admission. Right? If the U.S. just follows the script, makes it easier to work with the U.S., there's something to that. And if America's united, it makes it easier to get things done, and words can help that. But fine analysis, right? Structure is what primarily matters, right? Treaty is a piece of paper. I don't expect groups to act against their self-interest. I think that structures dominate situations, and nobody is fully predictable. No country is predictable, right? We have no eternal allies. We just have interests, and the most powerful bond between people and nations is common interests. It's not common values, right? Values are the beautiful words that we use to promote our tribal interests. Being predictable is a strategic weakness. It allows other nations to price in our behavior and take advantage of it. When you're predictable, other people free ride. You're less agile. So I like the overall direction of the Trump approach to foreign policy. Just wish he was treating our allies and our alliances a little more carefully.
Yeah. Narcissism.
Yeah.
But also...
Yeah. Is it narcissism or is it just mental illness? Like, I think there's a fair amount of just raw mental illness out there.
Well, I think mental illness is
So what is mental illness? When your mental faculties aren't working in your interest, right? My wrist does everything a wrist should do. To the best of my knowledge, like all of my body works as it should, from my toes to my head to my ears. If my wrist didn't do the things that a wrist was meant to do, right, it would be in a state of injury or impairment. So too, if my mental faculties and internal psychological incentives are not aligned with my own best interest, then there's some kind of illness.
Sort of narcissistic, or can just lead to that, which is a sense of grandiosity, right? So you think everyone is hanging on your...
So from some theories about attachment, that 2/3 of people have secure attachment, and then 1/3 of people don't, and they come from trauma, and if you come from trauma, right, there are two typical ways you can respond. You can make yourself bigger, or you can make yourself smaller. And so sometimes I make myself bigger than I should be, and other times I make myself smaller than I should be. But either disproportionate response is not adaptive, right? I had a very sharp friend who would kind of call me out when I was being bigger than the situation required, and he recognized that I would put on a performance when I was feeling most insecure.
Every syllable. So, thinking you're Napoleon is a mental illness, but it's also grandiosity, but it's also narcissistic. So maybe they all sort of swim in the same pool. Mm-hmm. You know what I was thinking?
So one of my favorite books is by the philosopher John M. Doris. It's called Lack of Character, Personality, and Moral Behavior. And the central thesis is that our behavior is frequently determined more by external, often trivial situations than by any robust internal character traits, right? If you're running late, something important, you're not going to behave like a nice person. And so I see our elite and the foreign policy establishment and the word fetishists making what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, right? Attributing a state's behavior to its internal character, right? Its credibility, honor, reliability, rather than the specific pressures of the moment, right? The French weren't defeated by the Germans in 1940 because of a flaw in the French character. It just so happened that the best German troops attacked France, where France was protecting itself with its least effective troops. So the best met the worst, and so the Germans won. If the best German troops had met the best French and English forces, then the Germans wouldn't have won. And with regard to Operation Barbarossa, Germany never had the capability of winning that war. So even if they'd gone all in for taking Moscow or any other strategy, they just never had the force and the power to win that war. So global traits like honesty or reliability throughout our lives, not such a useful frame. Instead, we tend to have local traits. We're honest at the office, but we're dishonest at golf. Our morality tends to be domain-specific. We're honest with our spouse, not so honest with competitors in poker, right? Nations don't exist in the abstract, right? Their existence is always balanced against competitors. So our willingness to help a stranger can be changed by very small factors, and a nation will shift its policies often based on very small shifts in inflation or technology. Right? We think people are predictable because we usually see them in the same situations. But when the situation changes, their character vanishes. So this fixation with character-based ethics, virtue ethics, is empirically flawed, and it relies on a model of how we work that it simply is not true. If you want to stay faithful to your spouse, it is more effective to stay out of situations where you're likely to be unfaithful than try to build up your virtue so that you can just handle any situation. And when you recognize how important the situation is, you don't put people on a stage or nations on a pedestal, right? You're not going to hero worship because you recognize that the person or the nation that is heroic in one situation will be less than heroic in a different situation. So instead, for nations and for individuals, we should focus on situation management, try to arrange our situations to encourage what we want. build hard incentives rather than rely on the virtue of our allies, right? And shattering of American credibility is not some moral tragedy. It is an epistemic correction. The world's waking up that the U.S. doesn't have any kind of global character trait of leadership. It has tribal national interests. It has local interests that, if it doesn't pursue, it puts its own well-being and safety and prosperity at risk. And those who are shattered by this are those who believe in lies. It's better to believe in truth, right? Nations don't have permanent friends, don't have permanent allies. They have permanent interests, right? When you recognize the importance of interests over values, when you adopt a structuralist view, right? When you recognize the behavior of a state is dictated by its position in the global hierarchy and its needs and vulnerabilities rather than an internal moral code, you are choosing a world of reality.
Their only defense would be 2 dog sleds. Kristi Noem was like, I can take care of those. It's interesting because dog sled drivers and Trump's brain doctor both say the same thing. Mush, mush.
All right, so Greenland is this big island, right? And it's got its own government, it's got its own leadership, but it's very connected to Denmark, and it has been now for 3 centuries. It's been different, had a different relationship over the years. It's been a colony back when colonies were allowed. Today, Greenland largely governs itself, but they're dependent on Denmark for a lot of economic aid, for national security protection, and economic subsidies. There's always been talk last decades about eventually there being a path towards independence. But as we'll discuss here in a minute, Greenland really couldn't be an independent country. It's too reliant on the current relationship with Denmark to survive on its own. It's got 56,000 people, okay? 56,000 people. To put that in context, that's how many people live in Burlington, Vermont. That's how many people fit in Dodger Stadium. It is a tiny.
So relying on values to save you is a poor choice. Now, those professions where expertise and capability and excellence is not exactly one-to-one, but is the most vague, such as medicine and law, they have to promote their strong ethical codes and their strong values because there's not a one-to-one correlation between excellence and result. You can have the best doctor in the world and the patient can still die. You can have the best lawyer in the world and you can still lose a lawsuit because of all sorts of factors out of the control of the particular professional. So to try to maintain their status and standing, these two professions engage in promotion of their values and their ethical codes. Now, engineers, right, their excellence is fairly readily apparent, right? If they are not excellent, you get disasters, and if they are excellent, you see the results. But ironically, as a result, they don't have as much status and magic. So relying on values to save you is an error. Because when your interests conflict with values, people will usually respond in alignment with their interests, even if they talk a good game with regard to values. Right? Values are culturally subjective. They are fluid. What freedom means to me, what freedom means to conservatives is different than what freedom means to libertarians, as to liberals and people on the left and right. Right? All these words we toss around like freedom and truth and justice, they mean different things depending on the nature of your hero system. And overwhelmingly talk about morality and values is a status play. And labeling any challenge to your interests as a violation of values, right, it is a status play. Right? Better to rely on incentives and common interests and recognizing changing situations and recognizing that when people have things in common, then they're going to be more likely to cooperate. And when they have life and death conflicts, they're going to be more likely to kill each other. Right? Maybe our most deeply held political and moral values aren't driving our behavior. Maybe these things are primarily our ad hoc justifications that we invent to support our actions in favor of our interests, right? What we call credibility and values is often just propaganda to facilitate coordination within our group.
Population. It's the size of people who you see at a Dodger game, the whole country. And they're spread out. Some of them live in a few more urban-y areas, but a lot of them live in very rural areas where if you want to take a bath, you melt a block of ice, literally, to take your bath. How big is it? It's gigantic. If you look at it on a map, it seems pretty big, but the maps sort of lie. Greenland is huge. It's 5 times the size of California. Okay, so imagine the number of people who live in Burlington, Vermont, living in the largest island in the world, 5 times the size of California. Just imagine.
So you have a leader, and he speaks about national interest, right? He's sending a direct signal to particular biological hardware that drives us. When people talk about global values, they're sending a signal, right, to people's threat detection system, right? And the values and the highfalutin things that we stand for, that's what we use to signal who is on our team and who's not on our team, right? Our interests are the biological imperatives that we satisfy. And the situation determines which of those particular biological imperatives gets triggered at any given moment. So when the elite say American credibility is shattered under Trump, they are mourning the loss of their power, of their social signal that they use to coordinate the world. But what keeps the world turning and running and operating is biological reality, economic and military power. That's what drives the world. So how come our elite chatterers have not learned these basic facts of life? Because you can never convince anyone to learn something if it is against their interest to learn it. You can never convince anyone of anything if it's going to cost them money, status, power, or prestige. Right? The elite chatterers operate within a particular situation that makes acknowledging the truth and the reality a high-cost social error. You lose status. Right? The elite are part of a specific professional caste. For a journalist or pundit, words are their primary capital. Right? If the world runs on interests and hard power, then the value of their ability to use words plummets. So they have this biological and economic interest in maintaining the fiction that their rhetoric, the norms, the global standing, the international human rights stuff, right? These are the primary drivers of the world. So what type of people succeed in our elite media landscape? Right? Those who don't worry so much about physical security, national security, hard boundaries, people who primarily react to the social signals of their particular class, right? And this elite narrative is just a coordination signal for an elite alliance. And to be part of this respectable alliance, you must speak the language of values. Admitting that politics is based on raw transactional interests is vulgar. It's low status. So when you frame reality and interest-based realism as shattered credibility, the elite saying that anyone who talks this way is not among the elite, right? These are low-class people. So our brains evolved for tribal connection. For our elite, their tribe isn't the United States, right? It's other members of their policy community, right? That is their particularly evolved psychology, and they're finely tuned to seek approval from that specific group, just like I seek approval primarily from realists, people who are committed to the truth. In reality, your reputation is often a matter of life and death. So sometimes your reputation depends upon certain circles saying all sorts of things that are simply not true. So it's worth pointing out when people have incentives to say things that are false. So failure to learn is a successful strategy for maintaining status within a group. But while it serves the individual, it makes this elite group of chatterers more and more disconnected from reality. Right? So our elite commentators are oblivious to reality because they are physically predisposed to prioritize saying things that are not true, to send social signals, and to prioritize their own group cohesion over reality, over the truth. It is strategically, personally costly for them to abandon their rhetoric to embrace truth. The situation that they are in actively reward this high-minded, nonsense. Well, blunt truths, right, are punished. So looking at things through a realistic or evolutionary psychology lens is low status because it strips away the intellectual mystery. It removes the moral high ground that justify their role as the world's essential experts. Right? The evolutionary psychology lens is powerful. Anything that does not promote a more adaptive evolutionary reproductive strategy is BS. It's a status play. It's not what people claim it is.
Imagine replacing all the strip malls and replacing them with glaciers. That's how big it is, okay? Slightly bigger than Mexico, and yet extremely rural. 80% of it covered with ice. They have fewer than 100 miles of paved roads, okay? So this is a weird place. I'm not saying there's nowhere like it on Earth, but again, 56,000 people living in a country 5 times the size of California with 100 miles of paved roads. Most people, if you want to get around, you do it by air. You do it by plane or some other aircraft.
So the San Francisco 49ers are still in the playoffs, but they've done amazingly well considering how many injuries they have. And there is a novel theory sweeping the internet and sweeping the NFL that is at odds with what the experts say. So we have the Washington Post here talking about an injured NFL team, a power substation, and a theory that won't fade. Right? We have a viral online theory for the rash of injuries among the San Francisco 49ers, and it is disputed by scientists, but it has the players' attention. Now, not all scientists dismiss this electromagnetic pulse theory, and my dad was a believer in it, right? He didn't like being under power lines or near power lines, and he didn't like being near power outlets. Now, I think that his fastidiousness with regard to these things is misplaced. But when I revered my dad, I expect I probably believed somewhat or respected his thought on the danger of electromagnetic fields. And I revered my father up until the fall of 1988, when I went away to UCLA at age 22. And within few months at UCLA, I went from revering my father to thinking that he was an emotional cripple and a crank. And there are some scientists who don't dismiss this electromagnetic theory. So apparently he couldn't get a grant to study the theory because there are too many steps missing in between. Right? So science is no longer something that the gentleman can engage in on his own. It's much more of an industrial process these days. So we have this bloke on X, Peter Cowan, and he's got a long thread here on low-frequency electromagnetic field. So press 1 if you think this is a danger. And I'm just trying to keep an open mind here. Low-frequency electromagnetic fields can degrade collagen, weaken tendons, cause soft tissue damage at levels that regulators call safe. We have a real-world case study proving this. An NFL team has practice study sits next to a massive electrical substation. Right? The San Francisco 49ers are statistically the most injured team in the NFL over the past decade. None of the usual explanations hold up. And he went to 49er practice fields with a Gauss meter, and they had a lot of electromagnetic stuff going on. He says this is degrading the collagen integrity in the player's tendons, ligaments, and muscle tendon junctions. The damage is subtle until a routine cut or a block ends in catastrophic rupture. Why hasn't anyone investigated? Well, if you ask an expert, you'd hear these rays are perfectly safe. Right? Federal guidelines only recognize harm when these electromagnetic frequencies cause measurable heating. Right? Crank theory, folk theory. And here's the connection to a familiar theme. and that is the people versus the experts. And I don't side consistently with either side. I'm right in the middle. And there's a great essay on this theme, the blogosphere and its enemies, the case of oophorectomy. And talked about how the experts say not a big deal to have an ovary removed, while bloggers are frequently much more accurate with regard to the negative consequences, such as it does lead to lower life expectancy and less pleasure in sex. So one major difference between experts and regular people is the experts think we need much less freedom of speech because it creates intellectual anarchy. Right? A ruling class believes the ruling class should decide on the filters to protect the public from misinformation. Now, sometimes personal experiences are more vital forms of information than the pronouncements of experts, right? There is a folk sociology of knowledge where lay people discuss, analyze the motives and the interests of the experts, and is sometimes quite effective at detecting bias in expert claims. Sometimes the experts can be wrong, despite their reliance on scientific trials. Right, many surgeons claim that these medical procedures, these oophorectomies, had no negative effects on a woman's sexuality and general health. But all sorts of lay people provided a space for thousands of women to report terrible outcomes, loss of libido, chronic pain, suicidal feelings. They're not being captured in all these scientific studies. And later meta-analyses and long-term research eventually affirmed that the bloggers were right and the experts were wrong. So sometimes professional groups, sometimes professional experts, right, have their own incentives that are not co-equal with truth. Sometimes they operate under the discipline and the incentives of status within their particular group, which forces them to conform to a consensus at odds with truth. So experts often rely on collectively organized heuristics, shorthands for science, randomized trials, have their own inherent biases and are not co-equal with truth. So sometimes the commentary and experiences of regular people is a more important source of truth than expert and scientific claims and peer-reviewed studies. Right? Maybe the blogosphere and the vlogosphere are not a threat to truth, sometimes a source of moderation. You don't have the institutional pressures to conform. More diverse aggregation of information can be a potential corrective to expert error.
It's a beautiful place, and a bunch of news organizations, because it's such an irresistible story, have sent reporters and photographers there. I want to show you a couple pictures. I want to buy one of these houses. I'm not sure how much they cost. Here's A6. This is a picture of Greenland, and they have these very colorful houses, at least in parts of the country. This is like an irresistible shot for a photographer. So there you see these colorful houses. If you're not listening to the podcast, you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. This is like a painting. It's beautiful, snow-covered houses nestled on a hill overlooking the water. Here's the same type of shot. This is the summer though, A7. This is again beautiful. Just a picture book kind of images. Okay, now what kind of place is this? When people think about every country in the world, what do they got? Most every country's got Starbucks, got McDonald's, got Walmart's. So I looked it up. Guess how many they have each of those three. Combined total, Starbucks, McDonald's, and Walmart's on Greenland, 0. They've got other stores, but they don't have those great American brands. They're not even a member of FIFA. They've tried to get into FIFA.
So NFL players, they have come to recognize that the interest-driving owners and the doctors selected by their team are not always 100% correlated with their own best interests. And often surgeons and doctors and professionals are incentivized to do all sorts of things that are not in alignment with their clients' best interests. So sometimes we can learn from personal experiences and lay commentary. Right? When you understand what is motivating, incentivizing expertise, right, it can give you a correction. So I think it's possible that this bloke is right. And I had to turn to Gemini, like under what sort of circumstance could this wild theory be right? And we don't have the evidence yet, but we simply don't know. And if it turns out this bloke is right, what a decrease in mainstream media prestige, what a collapse in expert authority. Right? The elite mainstream media functions as the primary enforcement arm for the expert class. Right? Their status in society would plunge if this guy is right. If podcasters and vloggers provide valuable corrections to the mainstream media coverage, then mainstream media has less importance. Right? The primary value mainstream media is that it acts as a filter that protects you from wild speech and unfiltered speech and racist speech. But what if this wild speech is more accurate than these vetted reports from the New York Times? Right? Then the justification for these filters would vanish. Right? The media loves to call theories that are not endorsed by experts conspiracies and misinformation. Right? These are tools for status closure. Right? They're protecting the interests of themselves, the experts, the league, the team, the power industry. Sometimes these incentives overshadow their commitment to truth. So people are not just going to lose trust in a single story. They will generalize that distrust of the entire institution. So the mainstream media is wrong here. Right? It's not just NFL player tendons that's on the line. People are going to ask, what else are they wrong about? Many people become radical when they realize the media has been lying to them about something. For example, different groups might have different gifts. Maybe not every individual, every group has identical gifts. So when the mainstream media treats scientific consensus as truth, as an objective fact, and then this is disproved, then mainstream media and the relevant experts lose status, power, and income. And the mainstream media would lose its monopoly on defining reality. They would no longer be the high priests of truth. They'd become just another voice in a large, noisy schoolhouse. And they'd have to constantly compete against the claims of the regular people.
For soccer, they're not even in. So part of why this story is so interesting and so complicated is you've got the relationship between Greenland and Denmark. Then you've got NATO hovering over the whole thing. And then you've got the people of Greenland. And every reporter who goes there finds the same thing. There's some public opinion polling that finds the same thing. There are some of amongst the 56,000 who would like a closer relationship with the United States. But every reporter who goes finds roughly the same thing, A13. People there are not super excited to be part of the United States in any way. Here's the headline from the New York Times, quote, "We're not stupid. What Greenlanders would say to Trump. A visit to Greenland reveals a swirl of feelings as people nervously await talks with the Trump administration about the island's future." The New York Times characterizes how people in Greenland feel about Donald Trump's toying with them. It's the word the Times used. And they say there's a kaleidoscope of feelings that swirl in Greenland itself. People are shocked, angry, confused, humiliated, insulted, and most of all scared. None of that sounds happy, right? I read the list when I was reading the story, and I thought, well, maybe they'll throw in hopeful or curious. No. Shocked, angry, confused, humiliated, insulted, and most of all scared. Here's a quote from a guy named Canuck Abelson, who says, "I hunt whales and seals. In the United States, they think whales and seals are cute and shouldn't be hunted. That's what I'm afraid of." So that's a particular complaint. Here is from the BBC a number of sound bites from people. We used to call them man on the street. Now we call them people on the streets, the snowy streets from Greenland, talking about how they feel about the prospects of an affiliation with the United States or an invasion. S7, please.
I don't want to be a part of U.S. and they should leave us alone.
Cannot take our country. It's our. We need to get and stand together and fight for it.
But to encourage to use your both ear wisely and speak less. We are not for sale.
All right, you can cut out of this one because people in the podcast won't hear it. Here's more of the same. This is from the Telegraph.
What if the reality is we live in a world where the strong take what they want and the weak endure what they must. So I claim to be all about truth that is acceptable for me in my situation to say out loud in public on a live stream without destroying my own life. If you have a strong in-group identity, that makes life more effective and more fun and more passionate, and it's usually a more adaptive approach to reality than not having a strong in-group identity, but there's always a price to pay. So what are the obvious truths to outsiders the various in-groups cannot publicly admit? So for modern liberalism, it is the power of biological reality, right? We're not born with a blank slate, right? Biological sex is fundamental. It's a dimorphic category. And admitting that biological sex has immutable consequences in sports, in safe spaces in medicine, well, that opens a door to essentialist arguments that are historically used to justify sexism and transphobia. So, for the devoted member of this in-group, the moral goal of inclusion supersedes the empirical goal of precise definition. And for American conservatives, even among the highly educated, right, accepting the social fact of evolution, right, is often socially damaging because it serves as a proxy for a larger cultural battle, right? You're surrendering to a secular materialist worldview that devalues religion and tradition and the divine spark in our souls. Think about academics and the arbitrariness of peer review. Right? Academia presents itself as a meritocracy governed by rigorous objective standards. I remember my rabbi, he said if I was going to go to his shul, I'd have to submit to him being the editor of my blog. And he said if you were writing for the LA Times, you'd have all these rigorous fact checkers and editors on top of you to keep you responsible. He was just tired of having to deal with complaints about my blogging. And academics often put forward the peer review process as the gold standard of truth and the only reliable gatekeeper for human knowledge. Now, sometimes peer review process is useful for getting more truth, and sometimes editors are useful. But peer review and editors are often a black box influenced by pseudo-power, academic rivalries, trendiness, data disclosure, right? Various elites protecting their own theories and their own interests. Many landmark studies do not reproduce, but they keep getting cited because they fit the dominant narrative. For years, we had all these tonsillectomies being performed, even though the evidence was overwhelming that they don't do good. So if academics are more open about this obvious truth, that their peer review process is flawed, is subjective, and that the entire justification for their prestige, their tenure, and their funding of this particular expert class, right, it will start to crumble. Silicon Valley tech bros, right, we're champions of user privacy and human connection. But these values are often fundamentally incompatible with their profits. So admitting that you are the product devalues their power would lead to more regulation and reduced profits.
Same thing. They went and surveyed what people in the streets said, and I don't have any reason to believe these are misleading. They seem, by all the reporting, to be pretty representative of what people in Greenland think, which is no enthusiasm for this project. S12, please.
A tweet about Greenland was the next target, so that was scary. I try to be pragmatic. I think there's a big loss of control in a sense of what's happening with your country, and that's scary.
So you think Trump is bluffing when he's saying that, you won't rule out using force to take Greenland?
Well, I'm saying that it's just a very unrealistic scenario and that there would be no need for it. So I don't see it as something that we should take as seriously as a lot of different actors right now are taking it.
So it sucks when you feel vulnerable and other people are laughing at you. And it feels good when you feel strong and you notice that other people are weak and vulnerable and seem very serious. So when I'm feeling strong, right, it can feel good for me to laugh and make light of the grim struggles of other people. right? If they're not in my group, if they're not connected to me and the people I love, right? If they're part of an out-group, if it's the Euro elites who are fighting Trump for their survival and for their personal class interests, but using the language of universal morality to cover up their particular desires, right? I can get all smug, I can get haughty, I can come disdainful because I'm just so convinced that no matter how unsuccessful my life, at least I see through the BS because I'm the good guy here, I'm the truth teller, right? There's a special, powerful type of intellectual satisfaction. There's an internal pride in watching people scramble when the polite fictions that they live by collide with reality. So the European elite project is built on the idea the world is governed by norms and treaties and shared values, that we've arrived in an end-of-history comfort zone. Then Trump comes along, upsets the apple cart, treats sovereign territory just like another commodity, another strategic asset. He's not just making a bid for land. He's ripping the veil off the fact that raw power and geography still matter more than the BS of international etiquette. Right? It feels good to say, I told you so. It feels good when you see all these people who are opposed to you and demean you and disdain you. Now you see their lives are upended because they've been mastering the wrong game. When they have to confront the rules have changed, and the rules that they were supposedly devoted to are just a temporary luxury, right? They've been putting forward the narrative, we are a community of values protected by the liberal world order. Reality, we are a peninsula on the edge of Eurasia, and we forgot how to defend ourselves because we've been free riding on American largesse. We just thought the U.S. would be always there to bail us out.
Home, my teenage daughter came to me and said, maybe we should, now it's time to move outside of Greenland, because she was scared of what's happening here. I never heard her say that before, so it was a bit scary to have this responsibility.
It just cracks me up how much fun Trump is having pointing Canada and Greenland, and how seriously the Europeans are taking all this, right? They're just so dour.
As a mother, try and be calm and say everything will be fine, even though we don't know what's going to.
But I can't laugh when my survival or prestige or status or power or money is threatened, right? Then I become more dour too.
Happen.
All right, so Europe's against this. The Danes are against it. People in Greenland, and including the government, but the people itself all seem to be against this. The president has emphasized national security, even though there's an American base there already. Even though the current arrangement allows for the United States to expand the military presence, there's a desire for the United States to change the status quo, and as the president has said, to move.
And our correspondent in Norway, Bob, says, what Greenland is saying is that Denmark's gibs are better than what America offers. I've not seen any evidence that the Norwegian or European elite has recognized that the rules have changed. It feels good to be right. It's a source of power. It feels good to have pride. Pride feels good. Why does pride feel good? Because it's an evolutionary adaptation that we tend to feel pride according to how much value we can transmit to other people. Right? A beautiful woman can transmit a great deal of value if she simply talks to you or smiles at you. When you see all these grand global moral claims as a status game, when you see this narrative as a form of control and self-interest, when you watch the people who benefit from these pieties panic, it feels good. It feels like cosmic justice, right? It's an acknowledgement and a tribute that you were paying attention to the machinery while they were just admiring the paint job. Right? There's a deep feeling, and people like me, I get deep feelings of exhaustion with the status quo and with the lies. Live not by lies. Right? We have an elite who've been insulated, condescending, out of touch, and there's a visceral and even a dark satisfaction seeing them humiliated, seeing them forced to deal with the same raw, chaotic reality that all the rest of us have to navigate. Right? It's fun to see the end of the lecture that the European elites have been delivering. It's fun to watch the breaking of the bubble. It's fun to see the shift in the power. Right? It's a normal, healthy, evolutionarily adaptive human reaction to that sense of triumph when you've been right and your opponents have been wrong. When the elite are touched by the same pressures and the same chaos as everyone else, right? It's about satisfaction seeing the playing field leveled, even if it's a tad brutal, right? There's a difference between looking at a geopolitical map as a theoretical puzzle, living with the reality that your safety and your stability is what's on the table, as it is for regular people, right? When your survival is insecure, you're unlikely to laugh, right? No longer joking about a real estate deal. Now recognizing the rules of the international order no longer apply, and everything that I've been taking for granted, right, has been revealed to be a fiction. We have seen a shift from the world of fantasy to the world of policy and power. It's fun.
Greenland's relationship with a bigger country away from Denmark towards the United States. Okay? Now, what's the status of the place there? I've told you they don't have any Walmarts. I've told you that there's 56,000 people there. Here's what the Wall Street Journal says about Greenland now and the state of things there. They're very reliant on the Danes for health care. They have universal health care. They wouldn't get that necessarily if they broke up with Denmark and affiliated with the United States. And the current economy, I got to tell you, folks, I would say it's screwed up. It's not thriving, okay? It's a slow-growing economy, the Wall Street Journal says, heavily reliant on the $1 billion a year they get from Denmark. And they are big into the export of shellfish, seafood, okay? A lot of shrimp. Interesting. I never would have thought about this as a basis for an economy. A lot of it's based on selling shrimp. Looking for the number here. Their exports of shrimp. Yeah, here it is. Seafood exports. 98% of the exports from Greenland are from seafood, and they've got a problem because of global warming.
So, what do you think the average IQ of Greenland is? It's a pretty respectable 98. So why do we have this common trope that the other side in politics is ugly? We have Adam Carolla and Megyn Kelly talking about how ugly the anti-ICE protesters are. We have Naomi Wolf, who advised presidential candidate Al Gore on how to appeal to men more effectively in the 2000 election. Now she's made a switch in the political spectrum due to COVID. She says, I've seen enough videos of the faces of liberal white women in conflict with ICE to know what is up. Liberal men, disproportionately estronized, physically passive, submissive due to work, gender, hectoring, or porn addiction. White liberal women are disproportionately sexually frustrated. Policing others, as in the pandemic, was an outlet for them, but it was not nearly enough. Yes, I remember the male-female expert on Dennis Prager's show, Alison Armstrong, talked about how women were enjoying the pandemic because it's one of those areas of life where women typically know a lot more than men, and it provided drama, and it gave them a sense of agency and importance, and that they were vital. And now Naomi says, smiles you see on their faces say it all. White women long for all-out combat with ICE, combat with men who tend to be strong, confident, masculine men, because that conflict is a form of physical release. They long for kinetic battle, and this is going to get uglier. Now, is there an empirical way to assess her claims? Not so easy. But people love this type of analysis. Remember George Carlin in the 1990s, or 1980s? He said, why is it the people who are against abortion are the people you at least want to have sex with in the first place, right? There's balance in nature. And it used to be that this critique of the other side was ugly. It used to primarily come from the liberal left. You had the Authoritarian Personality book by Theodore Adorno, published in 1950. Conservatism, not just a different set of ideas, it was a psychological disorder. It's all about repressed sexuality. Right-wing types are cold and rigid. They're repressing their natural impulses. You had the psychoanalytic left with Wilhelm Reich. Talked about how fascism is the result of unsatisfied sexual longing of the masses. Richard Hofstadter, the paranoid style in American politics, right? Right-wing movements are driven by status anxiety. Then, 1979, the critique flips. Christopher Lasch, a man of the left who became a hero to the post-liberal right, published the book The Culture of Narcissism. And he says that liberal culture has created a new pathology, the narcissist. So modern liberated people are not free. They have become infantile, dependent on experts, obsessed with their own authenticity because they lack deep, authentic communal connection. And he sees liberal political activism as a way for empty people to fill their empty lives with a sense of meaning that they can't find in their family and their work. So now we have the right taking on this critique of their enemies. And why is it so appealing, this type of analysis? Why is it so addictive? Why is it so enduring? It's a cheat code, right? You don't have to study law and ethics and economics. You don't have to research facts. You don't have to refine your logic. Just define your opponent with a pathology and you win by default. You strip them of their standing to speak. If a woman is only protesting because she's sexually frustrated, then her arguments don't matter. It's the unified theory. We love simple, overarching explanations for complicated things. The world is a mess of complications, of conflicting laws, grievances, incentives. So if you can just boil it down to estrogen and porn addiction and reduce massive geopolitical and social movements to a single biological drive, the world becomes legible again. You get a unified theory of everything. You get the magic key. You get an in-group high. Right? Political arguments are usually weapons where we denigrate the other side and we make our side feel better. Right? We love any argument, any joke, any insight that reinforces our superiority to our opponents. And there's a thrill in saying the forbidden truth. Right? These arguments are low blows. They're pseudoscience. Right? It shows that you have low status to make this kind of argument today. So you get to boost your ego. You get to create a us versus them dynamic based on health and vitality and looks. You get to replace messy data, complications with a simple visceral narrative. You get the ultimate ad hominem. You don't have to deal with the person's character or arguments. You attack their very being, their very biology. I can't defend against that. So if you talk about physiognomy and looks, right, this shows that you're low status, you're using pseudoscience. If you want to belong to the mainstream elite, you have no chance. Right? Elite discourse prefers to focus on ideology and policy and systemic structures, not on biology. Right? Physiognomy and vitalism, these are 19th century racial and social hierarchies that the modern elite project has been dismantling. And our elite tend to treat the mind as a separate rational entity, separate from the body. So any suggestion that the body is driving the bus, well, the elite find that insulting to their perceived intellectual agency.
There's less shrimp than there used to be. The three main big things that they send out are halibut, cod, and shrimp. And apparently the halibut and the cod are eating the shrimp now because there's more of them. So less shrimp, which they need to export. And again, very reliant. $1 billion a year is a lot of money that they get from Denmark. And here's a quote from the Wall Street Journal. Greenlandic officials quietly concede that in the short term, at least, anyone running this island is more likely to find themselves staring down a money pit rather than a gold mine. One more from the Journal. The island is one of the world's biggest welfare states. A vast expanse of ice-clad villages whose residents, reachable only by helicopter and prop jet, are nonetheless accustomed to the perks of Denmark's social democracy. Free healthcare, robust schools. It could also take years and billions of dollars to transform an economy, again, where 98% of its exports are from seafood. Now, there's mining potential there, and the president and others have talked about that. And global warming, while it's hurting their seafood, it makes it easier to mine, right? Because a lot of the 80% of the country's under ice, more likely to be able to get there and mine if the ice is melting. Right now, Denmark provides half of the revenue that the Greenlandic government gets. It's 20% of the island's GDP. Here's what they pay for. They pay for police, courts, banking, and the healthcare and defense. That's a lot. And so if the United States, if the president gets his way and he takes the control of Denmark away, somebody's going to have to cover that stuff. And the question is do the United States taxpayers want to pay for it? Don't know. Don't know the answer to that question, but it would be a lot. So what are people talking about? They're talking about no invasion, even though the president keeps threatening it. Stephen Miller has talked about it. Here's what the New York Times says as a possibility for changing things, which is what we have in a relationship with the Marshall Islands. Okay, Marshall Islands in the Pacific recently re-upped a relationship with the United States. It's called a Compact of Free Association. Okay, the government there is independent to the United States, so it's not a state, but it receives $115 million a year from the U.S. taxpayers.
So Winston Churchill was not a big fan of the Soviet Union and of Joseph Stalin until these two groups were united by a common enemy, and about the closest, strongest, most powerful way to bring people together is to have a common enemy. Right? That's what creates a strongly identifying in-group, when you can have a common enemy.
By granting, in return, they grant America authority over defense. So piece of this is about defense, no question. But a piece of this is also about the economy. And what could we get there? There could be tourism there. There could be...
So speaking of the economy, I noticed that worker productivity in the United States jumped about 4 or 5% in the last quarter of 2025. I mean, that's a massive jump that has huge implications for the American economy. I know that Australia's economy has had virtually no productivity growth in the last 25 years. Americans work harder and more productively than pretty much any other nation in the world. And I think it's reasonable to expect that the increasing implementation of AI is driving that productivity advantage. And there was a deeper, more profound point I was going to make, and I've lost it. I had the most noble of motives.
The access to minerals, including those rare earth minerals that have become such an important part of America's view of the world in the wake of trying to make sure China doesn't have leverage over the United States. And then there's just a question of sphere of influence, of keeping China and Russia away diplomatically, economically, national security from this hemisphere. NBC says, A4, please, that if we wanted to just buy Greenland, if we wanted to say, not take it militarily, but say.
So we're evolved to be tribal. We're profoundly affected by our social incentives, by our family, extended family, our tribe, our nation. And condemning identity politics is condemning reality, right? We're driven by our identity. Doesn't mean that our identity is immutable. It can change. And you will develop the strongly identifying in-group identity if you have an enemy. So my more shallow friends dismiss victimhood as weak and unworthy. But the stronger your in-group identity, the stronger your sense of victimhood. And the only exceptions are insignificant, right? You can find a few individual exceptions to this theory, but it's by weirdos like me making a status play, right? In the real world, group cohesion builds on the fires of shared grievance, shared anger, and perceived external threat. A robust in-group identity requires an enemy. To feel us, there has to be a them that threatens our prosperity, our values, and our safety. Right? When you feel embattled or threatened, if you feel that your group is being suppressed, if you feel that your group is the forgotten man, the silent majority, that taxpayers are being robbed, that believers are being persecuted, your victimhood will power your in-group identity. When you think that the experts are monopolizing resources and social standing and framing themselves as the party of truth and justice and everything beautiful, right, and you believe in the wisdom of the people, right, you're going to feel victimized and mad. And that will create boundary maintenance. That will create moral hierarchy. Your in-group is good. Your in-group is just because it's being targeted by the bad guys. And you can have all sorts of opposing groups using identical psychological frameworks to power themselves up. Right? Before a game, both sides are powering themselves up, telling themselves how wicked the other team is. So people on the left may well focus on historical and systemic victimhood. Conservatives may focus on elite power and cultural and bureaucratic victimhood, the deep state, the Ivy League elite. Both cases, the strength of the in-group identity is linked to the perceived injustice that your group faces. And without that friction, the in-group loses its definition and just dissolves. And one of the most powerful books on this is by Ronnie Goodman, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression, and the Nature and Origins of Conservaphobia. So from a liberal perspective. There's no such thing as conservaphobia, that conservatives have no basis in reality of claiming oppression, but every group can find evidence that it is oppressed. So conservatives have recast themselves as an oppressed group because that gives them power and energy. It's hard to get anything done without energy. You develop a robust in-group identity, and then people outside of your in-group will become the other. And you don't have usually positive feelings. So conservatives will view liberalism as a totalistic worldview that tries to indoctrinate the populace and hector the good common people and marginalize thought criminals. So this creates excitement, it creates high stakes, and it gives you incentives to fight back. So if you're on the right, you will likely dismiss progressive claims of victimhood as histrionics. But for your own group, you'll claim a highly rarefied Kafkaesque variety of victimhood. Right? So conservatives see their in-group as a repository of the authentic America that is being subjugated and dominated and raped by the unnatural and haughty civilization of the liberal elite. So gun owners, right, they feel this quarter comp against firearms. They feel they're the victims of snobbery homeschoolers. They are wary of the lust for control by progressives who want everyone to go to public school. Conservative Christians feel that the secularists in power. Small business owners feel they're being bullied by the government. Trump supporters feel the visceral contempt from elites, see them as bitter clingers and primitive throwbacks.
Say to the Danes, we want it. Estimate is $700 billion. I don't know where they got that number in the scheme of things. That's a lot of money. $700 billion plus trying to make sure that people there are happy. People have talked about, Reuters has reported, the administration have discussed giving to win over the hearts and minds of people in Greenland, maybe giving them all some money. This story has come to a head because this week on Wednesday, as I said, Marco Rubio, the vice president, met with the two foreign ministers of both Denmark and of Greenland to try to win them over and have a conversation. Did not go well. Here is how the United States, there's some coverage. This is S1. This is how media around the world has been covering this story. S1, please.
Nunatsinni Danmarkimiillu uqaajartuutigineqartut USAmut ullumi ataatimiinnermi angunneqarput.
Germany has announced it will send troops to Greenland for the first time, along with other European countries. It's part of measures to boost defense on the Arctic island, as U.S. President Donald Trump insists the Danish territory is essential for U.S. national security.
Interesting to hear the foreign minister use that word conquer. That it is clear that the President of the United States in the year 2026 wants to conquer.
The minister says it's totally unacceptable not to respect Greenland's territory. That's after he met with Vice President J.D. Vance for talking.
There really is a sense of disbelief on the streets here in Nuuk that the Greenlanders have found themselves in this situation. We've just been driving around and seeing that there are fresh Greenland flags flying all over the capital. There's even 2 new flags flying over the EU building here in Nuuk. Now,
so great interest around the world in this. It's a compelling story. It's an only Donald Trump story, right? Other presidents have talked about wanting more control over Greenland, and this is not a new concept. But Donald Trump threatening military action, Donald Trump basically saying my way or the highway, gotten a lot of attention. So this meeting on Wednesday at the White House, the foreign ministers, it was sad, I have to say. The two foreign ministers came out of the meeting, and here's the headline first about the meeting from the New York Times. Where's that about the meeting? All right, New York Post. There are 2 parts of this that made me very sad in the aftermath of the meeting, where the Danes and the Greenlandic foreign ministers came out and they said, it didn't go all that well, but we're going to continue to talk. New York Post pointed out that the foreign ministers light up after high-stakes meeting. Watch this video. They come out of the meeting at the White House, and they both obviously have some sort of nicotine addiction, and they race to be able to smoke. Here it is, S6, please. This made me sad. I don't mean to look down on people who have tobacco addiction, but I found it a little sad to see them have to race out to get their cigarettes. Here it is, S6. All right, so you see him there leaving the White House. The guy's jogging. That's the Danish foreign minister. He's running. You think, well, where's he got to get to so urgently? And opens the trunk. They're putting stuff in there. Where's he got to go? Well, they got to get to smoke. So you see him sharing another cigarette with his Greenlandic counterpart. So you look at the looks on their eyes if you're not listening to the podcast, but you're watching. And then they spoke. They spoke at a press conference. They spoke. The Danish foreign minister was on with Brett Baer. Here he is. Here's some headlines. A14, Washington Post says that there's a fundamental disagreement. Still don't know exactly what was said in the meeting, what the president wants. Washington Post advances Greenland.
Bro, why can't you find the sunny side? Why can't you find the humor in this? Well, right, the difference between tragedy and comedy is time. Think about white nationalists, right? You got these marginalized people, often disparate, disorganized people who find unity through dealing with the shared enemy of multiculturalism and immigration. Think about racial and ethnic succession in a neighborhood, right? One group moves into a neighborhood, other people move out. White flight, blacks move in, whites run away. Think about conflict over turf. In all sorts of cities in Los Angeles, Latinos have been increasingly moving into dominantly black neighborhoods, and blacks have been forced out. Right? Not a lot of cohesion between American blacks and Latinos. Right? In professional offices in California, right, the professional elite, overwhelmingly white and Jewish, and the staff, overwhelmingly Latino. But Latinos are about half of California, but only 6% of licensed attorneys, tiny percentage of doctors and other professionals, black attorneys, about 3%, right? But the support staff, overwhelmingly Latino.
And meeting ends with, quote, fundamental disagreement. Diplomats from Denmark and Greenland agree to set up a, quote, high-level working group, but said there was little consensus. Here's Mr. Rasmussen, the foreign minister of Denmark, talking to Brett Baer, S5.
I mean, this is 2026. You trade with people, but you don't trade people. And there's a third way forward. And that's what we agreed today, that we will now set up this high-level working group.
Yeah, a lot of powerful people have been deterred from doing what they want to do because they heard beautiful words and invocations of profound morality syllogism.
To explore whether there's a way forward where we can accommodate, which I totally agree, the president's concern, and still respect, of course, the territorial integrity of...
Yeah, nothing more exciting than respect for integrity and territorial integrity. That really gets our primitive evolutionary juices flowing.
The Kingdom of Denmark and the Greenlandic people's right to self-determination.
Mr. Foreign.
So their press conference.
Right, if you are going to a comedy club, right, you want to understand your genre, right? Trump is operating in a particular genre. I just think that his opponents would be more effective. They recognize the genre that he was operating in. Now, so much conversation about Greenland, and Mark Halperin here is going to give us the real deal.
Conference was sad. They're clearly, have learned the lessons. If you want to deal with Donald Trump, you have to butter him up, say nice things to him, give him what he wants, but they can't give him what he wants. And you can understand why they'd be resistant. First of all, their people don't want to be part of the United States. Denmark doesn't want to give up the relationship. They don't know what's in it for them at this point. But also, they got a lot of people on their side. Okay, they got a lot of people on their side. NATO's against it. Denmark's against it. The people of Greenland appear to be against it.
How many divisions does? How many non-American divisions does NATO command? Right, almost as many as the Pope commands.
And this talk of a military invasion has inspired a lot of people in the United States to be against it. Here's Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, a Republican, who is not high on a military invasion, to say the least. S8, please.
To invade Greenland and attack its sovereignty, a fellow NATO country, would be weapons-grade.
It's not who we are as Americans. Now, I don't think that Trump's rhetoric and behavior is good. I think Trump is careless and disrespectful of our alliances, that we should put a little bit more effort into treating our allies with respect, because you never know when you might need them.
Stupid. President Trump is not weapons-grade stupid, nor is Marco Rubio.
All right, so who else is against not just a military invasion, but just the whole concept of trying to strong-arm Denmark into giving up Greenland and strong-arming the people of Greenland? New York Post, not for it. A2, please. This is a headline of an editorial that ran after the meeting. Trump's Greenland gambit is a sideshow that the forces of freedom don't need. They're against it. Who's also significantly against it? The American people. Number of polls out this week suggesting there's no support for this. Here's Quinnipiac. They did a poll. Again, I could show you others.
Power, foreign policy, the world structures are overwhelmingly run by elites, right? Popular opinion has only a limited effect, in particular with regard to foreign policy. Right? It's been decided by our elites that America will go to war on behalf of Taiwan, even if 99% of Americans are opposed. So not a big nexus, there's my fancy word, between popular opinion and elite power.
The same thing. In the wake of the discussions about the United States trying to either buy Greenland or use military force to take control, here's what the voters in their poll say. 86-9 said they oppose the United States trying to take Greenland by military force. So here you have the president saying we might use military force, and 9% are for it, 9% of the whole country. And then...
So just imagine all the staff at work. They have this very strong opinion, but the person who signs their check, he has a different opinion. So who do you think is going to win? Right? To the victor, to the powerful, usually go the spoils.
The question of should the United States buy Greenland? Only 37% are for it, 55 against. Again, in our divided country, 55 is a landslide, and a lot of that's independents. Democrats, very much.
I remember I had a friend who used to be a Christian clergyman, and then he left the clergy, and we would talk on Saturday mornings about secular biblical criticism. And I was very lonely at the time, so I was really grateful for his friendship. And one day he said to me that his main argument against male-on-male homosexuality, that he found it aesthetically displeasing. And Glib Medley says it is aesthetically irksome that such a tiny nation like Denmark rules this great landmass of Greenland.
Very much against. Republicans more for it, but independents breaking against the president's point of view. So where does that leave us? This is a story that's, there are a lot of other stories in the news. We'll talk about some of them in a minute. But where we are is the president has no allies on this right now, right? Doesn't have Greenland, doesn't have Denmark, doesn't have Europe, China, Russia. Nobody else is for this. The American people are against it. Most people in Congress.
Right. Most things go better with allies. Group strategy usually wins out over individual strategy, except for when it doesn't. Sometimes the desires and wishes of one person will be more powerful than all the groups in the world and their beautiful rhetoric.
Congress are against it. Privately, Republicans would say they're against it. And it's a little confusing because what the president says he wants, which is a more robust defense capacity, he could get, because under the current agreement, the United States can expand its military presence. What I believe is going on, from having reported this out this week with a lot of people who understand how Donald Trump works, is he wants maximum leverage. We talk about Trump and leverage here all the time. He wants maximum leverage. He wants to be able to get what he can get in terms of economics, diplomacy, military, and at the lowest cost to the United States. And so I think what you're going to see is an effort to say, just how much public opinion does he need to move, particularly in Greenland, to force the hand? And you saw in the sad sack reaction of the foreign ministers from the two countries, from Denmark and from Greenland, they know they don't have a lot of leverage. They know that if the president wants to force this, they're going to have to give something up. And I think you're going to see a relationship where Denmark is still connected to Greenland, as they have been for centuries. The people of Greenland are made better off economically, or at least have that hope. And the president gets what he wanted in the first term and other presidents have wanted, which is big access where he doesn't have to check with the Danes, doesn't have to pass anything through the legislature there. If the United States wants something there in terms of rare earth minerals, in terms of military, in terms of sphere of influence and the economy, the United States can get it. That's what he's going for. And he's got a lot of leverage. These threats.
Right. Good, strong, solid analysis there from Mark Halperin. Now, my dad went up against the expert consensus in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or at least the hierarchy, the administrative power in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So what was the fallout from Desmond Ford's controversial theology?
Some meals that nourish both body.
So the Lord had specifically impressed our hearts that we are nearing the final crisis and that he wants a people prepared. And the quotation that really sparks us or moved us is in Manuscript Releases, Volume 1, 2-8, which I believe is our mission. Not only us, I believe that...
So this is fallout from Desmond Ford's controversial theology, the Desmond Ford effect. I remember delighting as a teen when I'd ask strangers what they thought about Desmond Ford, because my father was a highly controversial figure. So I'm curious what the messages of Present Truth Ministries have to say.
Every Seventh-day Adventist, this is our mission, to prepare people to stand true to God.
So groups have stated missions, and the practical reality of most members of the group is often different from the words in their sacred text. So most Seventh-day Adventists are not particularly passionate Adventists. Most Seventh-day Adventists are in it for the lifestyle. There are three types of Seventh-day Adventists, right? There are lifestyle Adventists, are probably a majority. Then there are evangelical Christian Adventists who feel a great deal in common with other evangelical Christians. Then there are traditional Adventists who are the most intense, most devoted, most willing to sacrifice. And these blokes are from this intense, traditional, distinctive core of Seventh-day Adventists.
During the investigative judgment. And this is the purpose in which I believe we exist as a ministry. I believe every ministry should exist for preparing God's people for what is to come. And obviously reaching the world as well.
Right.
Yeah, so, that's basically...
As we understand it. Now, when we say the spirit of prophecy, some people argue and say, oh, you're Adventist, you say, Ellen, you call Ellen White spirit of prophecy. Okay. We believe she had the gift. We believe she had the gift.
So from a secular perspective, right, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was largely inspired by that rare thing in religious denominational history, a woman who inspires and dominates the early years of a particular denomination. And from a secular perspective, Ellen G. White was an epileptic who had epileptic fits and visions that just so happened to coincide with what the church elders had already decided, that she would preach the virtues of vegetarianism while eating meat herself. Right? I was raised on the Talmud of Ellen G. White. She would promote abstinence from alcohol while she would drink alcohol herself. So many of us ex-Adventists have a chip on our shoulder against Ellen G. White. And it was such a relief to move from Avondale College in Australia, where Seventh-day Adventists in particular and Christians in general are much more distinctive and devoted compared to the general population, to America, where most Seventh-day Adventists were just lifestyle Adventists and much happier, much more easygoing in their Adventism.
Of the spirit of prophecy, we believe she did. All right. So now we see what the problem is. Okay. Now, Desmond Ford. Oh, brother, we got to talk Desmond Ford, brother. In fact, this whole program, that's what this whole program is about. The effect of Desmond Ford. Now, before we get into this.
So I wonder, did my father enjoy other people talking about him? Did my father enjoy being the center of attention? Did my father enjoy provoking people? I suspect so, just like I do, though I'm often assured that my father was driven by much worthier and higher motives than myself.
Let me just remind the viewers out there. Obviously, this is going to be a condensed version. We can't share everything right now on this one program. I'm going to invite you. I link Brother Devin's channel and the title of this presentation on YouTube. I would encourage you to go to his channel because he did a 3-part presentation where he was debunking.
Now, do you think that I would enjoy someone doing a 3-part series debunking me? Oh, please, no more attention for me.
This idea of all these other brothers coming out, with the same regurgitating the ideas of Desmond Ford. Okay, he took his time and debunked them one by one. So I would encourage you all to go there. But now, for the purpose of our
So I was changed when I went to UCLA pro-Israel versus anti-Israel protests, and I was like deeply ashamed by a lot of the behavior on the pro-Israel side, and I felt some respect and thought that often, like, my side, my pro-Israel Zionist side, behaved worse than my enemy, and it shook me up. And it was a learning experience for me to realize that many of my father's fiercest opponents were terrific, good, godly, holy people, and they weren't any inherently worse or better than my father's fans.
Our purpose this morning, we're just only going to do like a condensed version of it. All right. Desmond Ford, brother. A lot of prominent preachers are falling for Desmond Ford issues. Same teachings, and some people are coming out, and it's interesting because some of these brothers that are coming out right now, they say, "Oh, you're not gonna believe. We found some things that's true that you guys have never heard before about Ellen White."
So if you're an intellectual, right, you want to find ways to stand out from the masses. If you're an aristocrat, you want to stand out from the masses. If you're a Seventh-day Adventist intellectual, you want to stand out from the masses. And my father was a useful vehicle for many Seventh-day Adventist intellectuals to stand out and be special and have assurance of heavenly salvation and have contempt for church leadership. So because I often lack good judgment and common sense, I turn for wisdom and guidance, not just through prayer to God, but also through chatting with Gemini, the AI chatbot. And Gemini lets me know that I am navigating the complex legacy of my father, that my journey from revering my dad to viewing him as a nutter mirrors the bloody battle between established authority and wild counter-expertise that I often talk about. Maybe I am driven to these topics for certain personal reasons. When I was beginning my studies at UCLA, my father was the central figure in what many consider the most significant crisis in the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My father was the counter-expert. He challenged the church's monopoly of knowledge regarding the heavenly investigative judgment and the events of 1844. The church's expert class, the dictatorship of the experts, used social control and traditional interpretation of text to protect the Seventh-day Adventist Church's identity. My father, like the bloggers, created a folk sociology of knowledge, right? Even though he had 2 PhDs from secular universities, but he argued that the official doctrine was a historical contingent necessity rather than a biblical milestone, that it didn't come from God, that it came from man and it was flawed. He would analyze the flawed human motives behind this historical necessity and why the church held on to a doctrine that lacked scriptural support. I don't know about you, but nothing bothers me more than a theological doctrine that lacks scriptural support. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church's 1980 dismissal of my father from the Adventist Church ministry, what you have here is a textbook example of status closure, right? Professional groups, religious groups protect their authority by excluding voices that threaten the group. Church leaders concluded that while my father asked the right questions, his answers were wrong. This created a validity gap. And some people, or the church, refused to engage with my father's 991-page document that my father paid me 5 cents for every typo that I found in that document. I'm not sure I found a single one. So church leaders, like elites in general, fear that uncontrolled public discussion will lead to intellectual, spiritual, theological anarchy. So my father's wild speech, Good News Unlimited, right, was the ranting of the ignorant. That would be a trad Adventist reaction.
About this movement, I'm going to blow your mind when I share it with you. No, brother. You are repeating things that have already been debunked. But you may have not been aware of it. So to you, it's new. So therefore, you think it's new to all Adventism. I know there's a brother, and I say this respectfully. We talk about Brother Ryan Day. Respectfully, we're not attacking him as a person at all, but we're talking about the things that he said. There was one of his videos. I think his first video came out. He said, "Oh, I got some things. Once I showed them to you, you never knew that they existed about Ellen White," and then started showing them. I'm like, "Wait, brother, what are you talking about? None of this is new. None of this is new.
So everybody wants to feel special. Everybody wants to feel that their group occupies the most significant place in the universe. And thank God for Jews that we have the Anti-Defamation League protecting us and protecting all good people.
Now, one of the main obsessions that the ADL has had has been trying to get Tucker Carlson silenced. You just heard at the beginning Jonathan Greenblatt demanding that. When he was at Fox News, the ADL was on a constant crusade aimed at the Murdochs, Fox's advertisers, Fox's affiliates, to try and get Tucker Carlson fired for quote-unquote anti-Semitic speech. They were obsessed with it. Here is an article in the Washington Post. ADL demands Fox News fire Tucker Carlson over anti-Semitic trope. This has deadly significance. This was April 12th, 2021. And then CNN, Brian Stelter in particular, hosted Jonathan Greenblatt because he was so excited to be able to call Tucker Carlson anti-Semite and racist, and to have the ADL blame Fox for tolerating Tucker's anti-Semitism. And Jonathan Greenblatt went on CNN and talked about how Fox is incredibly immoral for keeping Tucker Carlson on the air. Listen to this.
Right. And, people like Lou Dobbs on the Fox network or Glenn Beck before him got great ratings with their wild, racist and ugly conspiracy theories. So what do we want Fox to do? I mean, first and foremost, Tucker has got to go. Again, I think it is a risk, not just to the corporation.
Do you hear every time they're speaking, they speak in the language of command and imperative? Like when they went before Congress and said the ADL instructed Congress. Here he is saying Tucker has got to go off Fox. Like, who is Jonathan Greenblatt to determine the rules of acceptable discourse in America for Americans? Tucker was the most popular cable host by far.
Bro, we have to have the elites regulate speech so we don't have anarchy. Come on, bro. And Barack Obama, he wanted to renovate the short 9-hole South Shore golf course in Chicago into an upscale 18-hole, but the main golfers on the south side, they made a big stink. And I didn't know this, but they're dominantly black golf courses, and I would assume the equivalent of are there black country clubs? They're certainly like white non-Jewish country clubs, or at least there were, and there are Jewish country clubs. According to Saylor, the black golfers on the south side of Chicago made enough of a stink about Barack Obama's plans. They preferred to have 27 short, easy, cheap holes of golf to 18 holes of spectacular but expensive golf, just like the elites would like us to listen to spectacular and expensive, intellectually expensive, cognitively expensive classical music. Why are we listening to short, easy, cheap, accessible rock and roll? So apparently there's the traditional black Langston golf course in Washington, D.C. So apparently most big cities have a municipal golf course that is tacitly the black country club, and then there is the white golf course. My God. And the character of a golf course will change the price, right? You want a championship excellent course with deep rough and lightning fast greens. Less fun for the average bloke who just wants a cheap, quick round.
Are in the history of the medium. Americans wanted to watch him, and they were. But because he strays from what the ADL thinks is the proper lines for how you can talk about Israel, now Fox has to fire him, or they'll go after Fox's advertisers and shareholders and affiliates. Yes, that's exactly what they're saying.
It's a risk to our society to be promoting these anti-Semitic and racist myths that literally were used by people on January the 6th to try to not just interfere with the election, but to murder lawmakers. I mean,
All right. So, as it turns out, just like Mark Lamont Hill and so many other people, the ADL demanded to be fired. Tucker did get fired by Fox News in 2023 at the height of his ratings.
That's a good thing. We need less speech. We need more regulation by experts to protect the ordinary man.
Success. And here's the Times of Israel. ADL hails Fox News for the long-sought ouster of Tucker Carlson.
Now, I think much of what Tucker has to say is idiotic. Right? I think Tucker's gone in a conspiratorial, low IQ direction that he is seeming less impressive with each passing year. So I'm no big Tucker Carlson fan. At times, though, he's courageous and a truth teller. And much of the time, he pushes low IQ nonsense.
U.S. Group head says, hey, the anchor, who was network's most watched host, used his primetime show to spew anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic, and anti-LGBT hate to millions. Yeah, the Anti-Defamation League doesn't care about racist, xenophobic, anti-LGBT. You can be as anti-LGBT as you want. Do you see the ADL ever calling for Matt Walsh to be fired by the Daily Wire? One of the most obsessively and psychotically anti-LGBT commentators to exist in American media in a long, long time. Like his obsessive focus. Of course not, because he's not a critic of Israel. They don't care about anti-LGBT or anti-racist speech. I've always said.
I think I have to hand it to Glenn here. He's got some pretty sharp critiques. So a lot of what I believe is contradictory. And so I love the evolutionary psychology perspective on life. I love the traditional Orthodox Judaism perspective on life, and they certainly seem to clash. Right? How do I reconcile David Pinsoff's evolutionary psychology? David Pinsoff is a professor of evolutionary psychology at UCLA. He writes this fun blog called Everything is BS. I revere traditional Judaism. They both make sense to me, but I live in society, and to society, these two perspectives contradict. So how do I navigate this? How do I explain it? Right? We have a fascinating intellectual challenge here. And as I don't have kids, I've got to find my excitement where I can get it. We have oil and water, right? We've got one side saying that our most sacred motives are cynical, status-seeking evolutionary adaptations. The other side posits that these same behaviors are divinely commanded acts of objective, universal, eternal moral worth. How to reconcile? So, it's possible. David Pinsoff has a sober view of human nature. Traditional Judaism has a sober view of human nature. Right? We hold opinions frequently not because we seek truth, but because they are useful. They signal loyalty to our alliance. We signal our virtue. We engage in high-cost behaviors to signal reliability and status within a group. And the reasons that we give for our actions are often just press secretary justifications for our deep-seated evolutionary incentives. So you can accept David Pinsoff's view that religion operates as a status-signaling group cohesion machine, and that Jewish law is an honesty signal. Right? It is difficult, it is challenging, it is painful, it is costly, so only a truly committed member would observe it. Right? So from a David Pinsoff perspective, you keep kosher to signal that you are a reliable member of the tribe. The traditional religious, Orthodox, Jewish textual perspective is you keep kosher because God said so. How do you synthesize these? God designed the world so that the path to holiness uses natural, social, and biological hardwiring inside ourselves. Beautiful synthesis. What about truth versus utility? So Pinsoff says opinions are BS. They're just tools for social navigation. They're not about truth. Well, it's a similar approach to the late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who argued that science and evolutionary psychology is about explanation, religion is about interpretation. So from the secular perspective, our conscious mind is a press secretary that spins our selfish motives into a noble sounding one. In a religious context, you can pivot. Even if your subconscious is seeking status or safety, your conscience can push you to align that with the will of God so that your free will and your religious merit coincide. So you can humble yourself to accept reality with David Pinsoff's Everything is BS lens. It checks your human tendency towards pride. When you feel holier than thou, remind yourself that your brain might just be chasing a status jolt. And you can use traditional Jewish text and practices to provide the moral guardrails that evolutionary psychology lacks. Evolutionary psychology is descriptive. It tells you what you are. It isn't prescriptive. It doesn't tell you how to be good. You can acknowledge that you are a biological creature with all sorts of BS incentives, and you can choose to channel these incentives into a community and a tradition. And in the Tanya, which is philosophy of the Chabad-Lubavitch movement of Hasidic Judaism, it's a recognition that we have a dual soul. We have an animal soul and a holy soul. The animal soul is driven by self-seeking, self-preservation, status, and survival. It's the biological engine described by evolutionary psychologists. We also have a divine soul that transcends or has the potential to transcend. So we don't need to deny biological reality. We need to harness biological reality. If your biological reality seeks status in your tribe through the practice of ritual, you can take that biological drive and use that status seeking to serve God. Rav Kook, first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, was quite open to evolutionary theory, as were many 19th century Hasidic rabbis. He liked the idea of the world developing on a ladder. So just because we have religious structures and incentives and practices that evolved from more primitive and more primal social alliances doesn't make them any less real. It means that God may use the natural laws of evolution to build the vessels through which we access God. So you can use the everything is BS lens to stay grounded. Stop getting disillusioned when you see political maneuvering or social gatekeeping in religious spaces. And you can see your own community as more than just its failures. So even if the delivery system, the social structure is subject to status seeking, the content, the Torah, the divine commandments remain the objective goal. Right? You can use the cynicism of evolutionary psychology as radical honesty. You can use the Torah to redirect your energy towards an honest signal of true sacrifice, kindness, and intellectual integrity. You can accept that your biological machinery is status-seeking and self-serving. And by accepting that reality, you can then open yourself up to pursuing a deeper and more authentic traditional practice of Judaism. You don't have to pretend that your innate instincts are purely altruistic. You can acknowledge your animal soul and then choose to conduct yourself according to the will of God.
The absurdity of all of this, but we're starting to get political data in on it, and it's not great. Not great. Here's the YouGov Economist poll on the ICE shooting dated, it was taken over January 9th through the 12th. Did you see any of these videos of the shooting of this woman? 69%, yes, I've seen it. Based on what you know, was the shooting justified? 30% justified, 50 not justified, 20 not sure. Is ICE making Americans more or less safe? 34% say less safe, 47% say less safe. ICE is making us less safe. And 34% say they're making us more safe. Would you support or oppose abolishing ICE? Support 46%. Just 4 points short of 50 say we want to abolish ICE. Oppose 43%. I mean, that's just not good. A survey they had done just the day before asked, do you think ICE should face criminal charges, the agent, for that shooting? 53% say yes. Just 30% say no. And now here's Harry Enton on CNN here in SOT 31.
Look at where we are today. We're talking about a negative 17-point approval rating. That is a 17-point drop from where we were during Trump's first term. Look at this. 51%. 51% of Americans say that ICE enforcement in cities is making those cities less safe. His net approval rating, according to our CNN polling, was at plus 3 points on the positive side of the ledger. But look at where it is now. It is way underwater at 16 points on the negative side of the equation. That is a 19-point drop in less than a year's time. The bottom line is this. ICE and Trump are losing the argument when it comes to the American people. They don't like this immigration enforcement, and it is costing Trump political points at this time. Caitlin.
One more piece of data, Adam. Dave Wasserman just tweeted out that the new Cook Political House rating, where they take a look at all the races coming up in the midterm, has just changed. 18 races have moved in Dems' direction, including 4 key races, which have been.
So you don't win by going to war with reality. And I think Megyn Kelly is accurately describing a painful piece of reality for those of us who are passionate about enforcing our immigration laws. So no political issue in the United States is more important to me than restricting immigration. All my instincts are on the side of ICE. But I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, and against my prejudices, I notice this growing consensus both by experts and by the American people that ICE isn't playing fair. So my populist side believes that wisdom resides with the people, and the American people now seem to be fairly clear that they think ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is out of control. And this is a challenge because MAGA is fueled by populism, which claims to empower the people. And here is given unprecedented power to a federal agency that many people have come to fear and distrust. Right? You almost never see an agency's public standing crater as quickly as ICE has over the past year. Right? Populism loves strength, but when that strength manifests as masked agents in local neighborhoods or the accidental shooting of civilians like Renee Good in Minneapolis, more people start to see ICE as a threat to their own peace and order, and I'm on the side of ICE. But this is a painful reality. MAGA is fueled by distrust of the administrative state, distrust of unelected bureaucrats. Populism requires an enemy, and the idea that the enemy was primarily the illegal outsider drove Trump's electoral win in 2024. Now the enemy is ICE in the eyes of many Americans who are not liberal or conservative. So how will middle-of-the-road Americans eventually view ICE? Will they see it as just another part of the deep state that you were told to despise?
Been moved from lean Republican to toss-up. Now, this could be directly related to what we're seeing in Minnesota and the propaganda being pushed by the mainstream on it. Could be related to Venezuela, where some 57% say they're unhappy with the decision to, quote, run Venezuela. So I don't want to blame it all on what's happening with ICE. But it does look like I call it disinformation that's being put out by the media around this ICE shooting may possibly be having an effect. I don't know. To what do you attribute?
I don't think it's disinformation put out by the media. I think people are reacting to incentives embedded in reality, and I wish it wasn't true. But this is a painful part of reality for immigration restrictionists such as myself.
The fall in support for Trump on immigration, which was positive, as Harry Enton points out, in March, and now is 16 points underwater. That's a 19-point swing down into the negative, and those numbers from YouGov on people's views of this shooting.
Well, obviously, as previously discussed on this show and every show we ever do, the slant with the media. You know, if you'd gone to Minnesota 5 years ago and you asked how many unarmed black men were shot nationally by police officers, they would go, I don't know, 50,000 a year? And you'd go, no, maybe between 6 and 9 or 13 or nothing. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And
so I don't believe that we evolved to be gullible. So I don't think this is being driven by gullible idiots spinning and swallowing elite-driven mainstream media disinformation. I'm a big, big fan of the TV show Landman. It's one of the only shows that I watch the credits. I love the spare music and imagery, the large, open, lonely spaces in Texas. Love this show.
There is a show called Landman, which is getting all sorts of buzz. And it's like a non-woke show where they're kind of taking on issues of the day from a...
I think I love pretty much everything by its creator, Taylor Sheridan.
Non-woke perspective, which is great because you don't see this very often. And they took on the issue of they, them people coming into the lives of young women like yourself in the following clip. Let's watch it.
I'm pagan.
I'm Ainsley. Pagan.
Pagan.
Like the godless religion.
It's actually Latin. Means country dweller.
Are you from the country?
I am from Minneapolis. So what are your pronouns?
My pronouns?
Oh, man, don't hit me with a copyright strike, bro. Don't strike me, bro.
Well, I would hope that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I don't make assumptions. You could identify as a sunflower.
You know, I've been told I look like one.
I use they, them.
You know...
I'm afraid to play anymore. I'm going to give in to my fears. Skip to the commentary.
I like Ainsley. This is a Taylor Sheridan production who did Yellowstone, so he's great. Your thoughts on it, Isabel? Is this like out of left field, this never happens? Or like, is this a Hollywood fantasy that somebody would wind up being roomed with a they, them?
No, not at all, actually. When I saw this clip, I actually confess I haven't watched Landman yet, although seeing these clips going viral really makes me want to watch the show. This is about a daughter of the main character who has moved into her dorm at Texas Christian University there in Fort Worth, Texas, and all of a sudden gets paired up with this non-binary, insufferable person. The clip is much longer. It's like 4 minutes long, going super viral on X, talking about how you can't bring any animal products into the room, don't bring your leather shoes in here, or any meat because I'm vegan, don't play any music, address me by my pronouns, and of course this person's from Minneapolis. It's so...
Okay, how's my sound quality now? Is it a blessing to strike or not to strike? Looking at Fox News right now with regard to Iran, I don't have a strong opinion. Emotionally, I would love to strike and blast the mullahs to hell. Not sure it's in America's best interest.
So beautifully written. But what's crazy is I'm watching this clip go viral, and I'm remembering countless stories that I have heard from current college students all over the country.
So one thing that bothers me, triggers me about the furor over ICE is that I was raised to follow safety first. And I think this is a middle class thing. It's an academic thing. I grew up on Seventh-day Adventist college campuses, and it was just ingrained in me. If there is violence or the potential violence, the wise man gets the hell out of there. And the more you've got to lose, right, the more incentivized you should be to get the hell out of there, meaning that the people hang out in these violent and potentially violent confrontations with ICE are going to be overwhelmingly marginalized losers like Antifa. So that's my prejudice.
This probably feels like a documentary for them watching this because...
So I was raised that it's much better to suffer a loss of honor and avoid a fight. But then at age 14, we moved to Auburn, California, a redneck community filled with Aggies. And first time I encountered, I think, the Scots-Irish in large numbers. It was a commuter community. People were fleeing the diversity of big cities. A lot of first consistent anti-black prejudice that I had encountered. And at the same time, the children of these people often had romanticized views of black people. And there were tobacco-chewing Aggies who were not averse to fisticuffs. It was a culture shock. So from my stay away philosophy, right, a crowd is unpredictable. You don't want to lose control of your environment, right? You don't just account for your own actions. You have to take into consideration the potential actions of everyone else, the police response. My father told me if I walked by a lawnmower to guard my eyes, to shield my eyes. My parents told me if there was any potential that I might see a naked woman to guard my eyes. Right? I was raised to avoid violence. I can't believe people would voluntarily seek it out if you have people you love and things to protect. So I came from insulated academic Seventh-day Adventist college, show up in Auburn, rednecks, big culture shock. Right? People who would seek out fights. Right? I met blokes who thought their honor was more important than the risks that came with getting into a fight. Chat says, sounds fine to me, but that said, I have the audio turned off, so I'm just watching the video. So most of the time when people comment on the sound, it's on their end. Why, if you love people, you got things to protect, why risk it?
I hear this exact same story told over and over and over again when I speak on hundreds of college campuses across the country. This is the reality of what the college experience has become because of the woke radical left. But I love that this character's response is just, yeah, I don't have time for all of that hoopla. And I think what you're watching now with Gen Z is moving on and saying, enough, we're not doing this anymore.
Truly. I mean, that has to be the response. It's a no. Like, I know a friend who's a teacher, and this teacher was like in a room where one of the students was like going by something like a mood ring to determine whether this person was going to be a he, a she, a they, them, furry, whatever.
So the Fifth Column podcast is no longer going to appear on Megyn Kelly. So one of the best movies that I ever saw in the news business was from 1987, Broadcast News, and the Albert Brooks character says, I've been offered a job at the LA Times. It's a nice, comfortable coffin. And then he has a warning about how standards slip. What do you think the devil is going to look like if he's around? He will look attractive. He will be nice. He will be helpful. He will get a job where he influences a great God-fearing nation, and he will never do an evil thing. He will just bit by bit lower standards where they are important, just coax along, flash over substance, just a tiny bit. And there's some other quotes that I love. The Jane Grey character says, it must be nice to always believe that you know better, to always think that you are the smartest person in the room. This is one of my big flaws. Just constantly think against all evidence that I'm the smartest person in the room. And then the Albert Brooks character says, no, it's awful. And then he concludes, you'll never know the pleasure of writing a graceful sentence or having an original thought. Think about it. Powerful stuff.
And she was like, pick one. You get one. That's it. That's the only way through this nonsense. Like, I'm not doing they, them. You pick one. And frankly, the only one I'm really going to go with is what the obvious biological pronoun is. But you guys have to deal with a lot. I'm sorry, Hayley. I feel like it was much simpler back when I was in college in late 80s to the early 90s.
It is much simpler, or it was much simpler. I will say I was randomly paired with a roommate freshman year who had an imaginary friend. I would take.
Just imagine getting paired with 40. So, Fifth Column no longer appearing on Megyn Kelly because she refuses to condemn Candace Owens. And I have mixed feelings because in the real world, you are rightly, accurately judged by the people you hang out with and talk to and do shows with, right? It's probably about the easiest and most accurate way of judging someone, who are their friends. On the other hand, the theatricality and the attention-seeking in this rubs me the wrong way, right? We got a group of people on the Fifth Column podcast, one who was a longtime acquaintance, an LA friend, Matt Welch, right? Great bloke, good friend, kind. So you got this podcast, right, making this public declaration. They will no longer appear on Megyn Kelly. It just feels performative, right? They claim to despise performative outrage, and then they perform performative outrage. Right? They're not just letting a professional relationship fade. They're actively using the breakup to reassure their own tribe, their own audience, their status peers that their hands are clean. So I navigated over to the Fifth Column Substack, and it says, your weekly rhetorical assault on the news, people who make it, and occasionally ourselves. Methinks they claim too much. Perhaps a more accurate description would be da-da-da-da-da, but never to the extent we risk our own status. Right? I agree, Candace Owens is off a rocker about many things, such as Jews. I just don't thrill to this social pressure to issue condemnations. Tucker Carlson, Candace, Trump, they all grew their audience by dumbing down their message, right? They speak fluent prawl. It's not my choice. I don't admire this. I don't have their success. I wanted to be a preacher like my daddy. I wanted to be a big, powerful bloke like Dennis Prager who made moral pronouncements. What stopped me? Was it my noble commitment to truth? No. What stopped me was that the tension between the flawed reality of my life and the nature of my aspirations became unbearable. So I said, I'll be a different kind of hero. I'm going to become the hero who explains the world more than judges the world. Right? This rhetorical assault of Megyn Kelly by the Fifth Column, it feels like a choreographed sparring match. Right? The status that they are primarily protecting is their own. Right? They claim to assault themselves, but it's always for tiny stuff. They admit to small faults. They try to claim, though, this huge reservoir of honesty that they can then use to avoid admitting larger structural denials of truth. Right? They want to create the simulacra, the feeling, the perception of self-criticism. They want to perform self-criticism without actually engaging in substantive self-criticism. They want to cling to the guardrail of respectability. Inside the biggest dissident, you have someone yearning for mainstream polite society recognition and status. Right? If they wanted to really assault their own status, that would mean they would question the very meritocratic and liberal myths that they use to justify their own positions as elite sense makers. Right? They are engaged in status protection, which is adaptive. We have this impulse for adaptive evolutionary reasons. When the association helped them, they engaged. Now that the status costs are being associated with her and her brand of fluent MAGA populism is rising, the cost is rising, they're now making the principled decision to distance themselves. And I recognize it. I think there's strong arguments for it. My own experience shows you what happens when you differ with your tribe. You lose your tribe. You lose your audience, right? I lost 90% of my audience in the year 2000. In 2007, in January or February, I was being interviewed by Los Angeles Daily News journalist Tony Castro, and he just said, by the way, I noticed that our mayor, Tony Villaraigosa, has stopped wearing his wedding ring the past 8 months. And I checked up on it, so it's true. I published about it and became probably the #1 news story in California that year. Now, journalists knew about it. They just didn't want to write about it. Right? I just relayed a tiny fact that forced a change in reality. The Fifth Column provides critique. They provide a linguistic performance that leaves the world exactly as it is, but it makes the participants in the audience feel more sophisticated for having discussed it. Right? They focus on narrative and media criticism, so they ensure that their battle stays on the field of words, where they are masters. They don't deal in outcomes and reality where data like the persistence of tribalism or the failure of assimilation might hurt them. Right? The Fifth Column stands for high production value, subscriber expectations, social standing. They're not going to risk that for truth. Right? The Fifth Column rhetorical assaults look to me much more like a rhetorical massage for their own class. Now they are trying to retroactively sanitize their brand. They wanted all the benefits to be gained from going on Megyn Kelly, but now they no longer want the cost. So phase 1, growth. They used Megyn Kelly to gain new followers, move into a larger media lane. Phase 2, pivot. They're drawing fire from the high status circle that they crave adulation from. So they denounce Megyn Kelly, show that they haven't sold out. Right? It's histrionic, contradicts their own stated philosophy of principled sanity and talking to anyone. Right? If they were interested in truth and explaining reality, they wouldn't need to announce this boycott. They would simply go follow truth. Right? Publicly declaring you'll no longer talk to Megyn Kelly is a juvenile mean girl tactic, something you see in high school. It's a private professional decision dressed up as a performance of public virtue. I understand it, I get it, but just rubs me the wrong way.
All right, let's get to some of these. I'll get to a critical one first and then an uncritical one second. This is from Patrick. Subject line, you should listen to your own interview.
What? What does that mean? I was there, motherfucker.
Moynihan is already defensive. The MK interview was such a disappointment. So many logical fallacies, so many BS arguments just left unaddressed. I get that she's your friend, and that makes it more difficult to engage the way you might with any other guest, but she was entirely unimpressive in her arguments, and you guys largely let it slide. The logical sleight of hand by Trump supporters like Megyn and Ben Shapiro is to just claim that Trump is okay because the left will always be worse. Of course, when you're only limited by what you can imagine your political enemies to be doing, then there's really no limit to what you can justify and excuse. I challenge you to go back and listen to this interview and evaluate her arguments objectively. Pretend she's being interviewed by Ezra Klein. There's no way you tear this interview. There's no way, he means to say, you don't or tear this interview to shreds if it wasn't your own show.
What? No, I just totally disagree. Yeah. And it's not because it's me that is being attacked or us that's being attacked. No, I completely disagree with that in about 1,000 ways. But that's almost like saying, buying a jazz record and expecting to hear the Dead Kennedys or something. Ezra Klein does something different than what we do. Not everybody who speaks across a table from somebody is doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, in the culture that we live in, I used to be much more combative as an interviewer, always, particularly at Vice. And I had a bit of a reputation for throwing punches a lot. I don't do that as much anymore because I think that's something that I've done and I don't find it as valuable. I think something like this is much more useful because what's the guy's name?
Patrick.
Because Patrick, we trust.
I just don't think these guys optimize for truth, which is fine. I just don't get any nutritional value. Right? They're never going to say anything that hurts them, hurts their career, risks their status. They'll say nonsense like all groups eventually assimilate into America. Not true. Like you can look at huge rates of poverty, crime, and other problems for one group that's been in the country for hundreds of years. Right? Groups tend to reproduce their life histories from their home countries. Assimilation tends to occur primarily in superficial ways like dress and sports and in language. Right? Their skepticism and their claims are quite shallow, right? Sticking to the assimilation is inevitable narrative. They maintain their respectability and their optimism. They make themselves socially acceptable and palatable, right? They get to criticize identity politics. They don't have to engage with uncomfortable, painful truths of persistent social stratification. Identity politics is tribal politics, and humans are deeply tribal. To condemn this is to condemn reality. The American melting pot claim is a thin veneer over biological and social bedrock that hasn't changed since the Pleistocene. Right? This is the ultimate third rail for the Fifth Column podcast. They admit that tribalism and racialism and in-group preference is an immutable foundational driver of human behavior. Their entire project of rational, individualistic liberalism starts to look like BS. It's a luxury belief held by a secure elite. They want to treat tribalism as a mistake, as a lapse in logic, something that can be corrected with better media literacy. It's not a permanent feature of human social reproduction. Right? In reality, the individual tends to vanish. We tend to react to people based on the group that they are a part of. Right? In-group versus out-group is not bigotry. It's a neural shortcut. We process pain or success of our in-group differently than we do for out-group. Right? They wanted to call out the BS. They'd have to acknowledge that their own heterodox circle is their tribe, their own status closure mechanisms. They want to keep out anyone who is low status or is dangerous to their status. Humans are fundamentally tribal. The American project sounds lovely. It may even be a useful fiction, but it's a fiction. We're parts of extended families, otherwise known as tribes, and we often compete for resources, power, and status. Identity politics is not a distraction from the real issues. It is the real issue. And I reported on the Antonio Villaraigosa story. It was a tribal rupture. It forced the local political tribe to confront a reality that they had collectively agreed to ignore. Right? The Fifth Column wants to stay in the realm of narrative because there's no cost and no pain to them. Narrative can be debated politely over drinks. Recognizing the power of tribe and zero-sum competition and how it doesn't care about good faith debate, right? That's painful. By framing everything as a conversation, they get to avoid grim truths. That human history is just the story of one tribe driving out or wiping out another tribe. Right? The BS they call out is the smoke. They don't want to talk about the fire of tribal competition because that fire burns the very institutions and social circles that they call home. When you look at the data on social mobility and cultural persistence, when you look at the truth, the reality, the situation, the melting pot narrative is a comfort blanket and a fiction. Social traits persist across generations more than the American dream narrative admits. Right? They don't want to talk about real human capital and culture in any way that can be labeled essentialist or race realist. They want to be invited to the cool parties. They want to maintain their status in the prestige media world. Crossing that line is a bridge too far. They're happy to attack the work establishment, but they want to stay a part of a professional class that values a specific type of cosmopolitan liberalism that is based on fiction. Right? They provide the feeling of profundity. They provide the appearance of a deep dive. They reference history. They drink expensive whiskey. They use sophisticated vocabulary. But they will not challenge the foundational fictions of their own social class. They want to talk about narrative rather than truth. They want to engage in media criticism, which is safe, rather than hard, painful social facts, which could cost them their career. I noticed the wedding ring tip and published it about the mayor of LA. Right? I didn't get to stay separate from reality and just engage in performance. Right? They perform depth, but it's a high velocity rotation of conventional existing ideals. The whirlpool looks deep because it's moving fast, but they never approach the bottom of the pool. They're not interested in the wedding rings and painful facts of the present day. They're not interested in the specific, tangible lies told by their own peers and their own institutions that they want respect from. They want to stay in the land of safe, abstract BS, a broad media narrative that everyone agrees is broken.
And you saw the interview and you made up your own mind.
Yeah.
What you're looking for us is a performance. To say, I disagree with that, and does that make us okay? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, does that make it okay for you to then listen to us because we've validated to you that we agree with you on this interview? If you've listened to us to...
If you pursue truth, if you describe the situation, you can't provide reassurance to your tribe. It is a painful conflict. Truth versus status seeking. Talk to you later, mate. Bye-bye.